Impact TV, we're ready to roll. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm opening the adjourned session of the annual town meeting. Today is May 24th, 2017, and this is the adjourned session from May 23rd, 2017. The time is now 7:17, and there are 134 voters present, with a quorum of 134 voters present. The tellers have been sworn, the warrant having been previously declared properly noticed with constable return of service, and as dictated, tradition has dictated, we will not be reading the warrant. The rules of the meeting, if I may. Town meeting is run by town meeting time and by Kingston as the Kingston bylaws dictate. If you wish to address town meeting, please raise your hand or step to a microphone. Wait to be recognized, and then step to the microphone and announce your name and your address. During debates on articles, keep comments focused on articles and do not make things personal. Let's remember to respect everyone, and only one person shall speak at a time. If you have a point of order and you want to raise a question, such as, is the speaker entitled to the floor? Is what the speaker saying, proposing irrelevant, illegal, or frivolous, or contrary to procedure? Is any pending action frivolous, irrelevant, illegal, or contrary to procedure? These are not debated, nor amended or reconsidered. It's the moderator's sole discretion. Just please stand or just yell out point of order, and I will get to you. Question of privilege is if you have an issue, raise as to your right and privilege of being at the meeting. If your safety, your dignity, your integrity, volume, temperature, noise, interference with your ability to hear, speak, or participate in the meeting, then just please announce question of privilege or go to the front desk and one of them will raise it for us up the front check-in if you don't feel comfortable. I just want everybody to understand that we have had in the past questions on intimidation. I want everybody to understand everyone has the right to their position. Everyone has the right to their opinion. Please do not stare down, do not intimidate, do not in any way interfere with anyone's right to participate in this meeting. This is a democratic process. If you have a motion to amend, I ask that you make that motion, then put it in writing and submit it to us. And part of that is the town clerk's duty and obligation as the record keeper of town meeting. If you want a motion to consider, then you need to do it according to Kingston bylaw, which is to make it tonight on any articles raised tonight. And I believe we did not get any motions to reconsider by 10 a.m. this morning, so there were none from yesterday. And so again, depending upon if the meeting ends tonight, then there'll be no motions to reconsider. However, if the meeting goes to a third night, then you would have to file it by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. If you want to call the question, please step to the microphone. Remember, you cannot debate the article, then move. You have to move to call the question. I want to remind everyone, or just let everybody know, that the fire department, we need to have the doorways kept clear for traffic to come and go, egress and, what's the other one? Access and egress. So as a result, I'm just going to ask that everybody keep those doorways clear and not stand in front of them. And that as we're voting, I want everyone to take a seat, please. And if you're going to have conversations, please step outside to have your conversations, as that sometimes interferes with people around you being able to hear speakers and what's going on in the meeting. So if that's clear and everybody's ready, then at this time, now being 7:20 p.m., I'm going to ask Chairman Wilson to make the opening motion for our adjourned annual town meeting.
Move that the following non-residents and non-registered residents be allowed to enter and address the town meeting. One addition to the names from yesterday: Peter Koska, Chilton Development. Thank you.
Having a second on that, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We left off with Article 23 last evening, so we're going to move right on to Article 24, our budget. So, if I may, again, I'm going to be asking our Finance Chairman, Mary McKinnon. And as we always do, I'm going to ask that Ms. McKinnon give us our town State of the State address on our finances. Ms. McKinnon?
But I have to move the article first.
You want to move it first?
That's what we always do.
Yeah. Okay, sure.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Good evening, everybody. Move that the sum of $45,601,000 $50 be appropriated to be expended for the operating budgets for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2017, for personal services and for expenses as printed in a document entitled Town of Kingston FY 2018 Summary Budget, and to meet such appropriation that $44,689,385 be raised and appropriated, $316,147 be transferred from water enterprise revenue, $284,316 be transferred from wastewater enterprise revenue, $40,000 be transferred from municipal waterways improvement fund, $71,202 be transferred from the septic loan fund balance, and the sum of $200,000 be transferred from surplus revenue.
Second, Ms. McKinnon, I assume you'll accept a friendly motion to amend and just add the sum of before all of those numbers.
I would accept that. Thank you.
So now, do I have a second on the budget? Second on the budget. At this time, Ms. McKinnon will give us our financial update.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and good evening, everybody. On behalf of the Finance Committee, I am pleased to present a state of the town finances, along with a balanced budget for fiscal 2018. First, I'd like to thank all of the boards, committees, department heads, our Finance Committee Executive Secretary, and the many others who have contributed their time and talents to not only managing our town, but to helping craft a fiscal 18 budget. I would also like to thank the Finance Committee for their significant commitment and contributions. Folks, last night was long. We got through about a third of our articles, and we've got a lot more work to do. I thank you all for coming back tonight and wanting to engage in town meeting. Last night, passions ran high on some of our articles. The passion that we have here in this town is great. The desire to improve this town is great. But I ask you tonight, when we consider these money articles, that you vote with your head and not always with your heart. We all have the best of intentions, but sometimes when we are clouded by emotion, we can make unwise or unaffordable decisions. So let's get to it. The town of Kingston continues to remain financially stable. Our credit rating from Standard & Poor's remains at a AA+. We are just one step away from the coveted rank of being a AAA community. Our free cash was certified at a strong $2.7 million, up from $2.4 million last year. Our excess levy capacity continues to grow and is currently at $1.6 million. We expect that with this budget, we will increase our excess levy capacity because we are not taxing to the full 2.5%. Our stabilization fund maintains a $2.1 million balance, and we are closing the gap on funding it to our target goal. At this town meeting, we are continuing to fund our OPEB obligation, and we are going to vote on continued investment in the town's capital assets with a $394,000 capital program. Now, to some of you, those indicators may sound like just a bunch of gobbledygook, but those numbers are important because they signal to the financial community, especially to the bond rating agencies, that Kingston is a fiscally strong community. But quite frankly, most folks are here tonight for one thing only, the budget, because you care about the impact on your wallet and on our services, and we understand that. In fact, the annual budget is the single most important document that this town prepares each year. It defines what we value in town for services, and it provides the funding strategy to achieve those goals. Tonight, we are presenting to you a $46 million budget. This represents a 5% increase over last year's budget. Within that 5% increase, 3.5% is coming from an increase in your taxes. It is important to note that this budget continues to provide all of the core services that you enjoy today. There has been no reduction in service. The budget remains fairly evenly split between town and school services, and the primary changes in this budget are listed on page 67 of your booklet. I'll let you flip there. The two big budget drivers that we see in the fiscal 18 budget are, number one, employee benefits. Our employee benefits line is up $387,000 over last year, and that represents a 7.5% increase. The other significant budget driver is with our school departments, and that includes all of our schools, the elementary, intermediate, as well as Silver Lake. We are looking at a $1.5 million increase over last year to support our school system. We've had a significant impact from our school district this year, so let me explain. But before I do, let me say that a strong school system is critically important to our community. It is one of the key factors that makes Kingston a desirable place to live. In our local schools, the elementary and the intermediate school, we saw a $778,000 spike in the cost of special education. As we heard last night, Kingston is experiencing a growing trend in the number of students receiving services and the number of events resulting in extraordinary expenses. When it comes to special education, there are some things you need to know. The town is legally bound to provide services for students up to the age of 22. And the bulk of the impact that we are seeing is when we need to place students in programs outside of Kingston to receive those services. There's one thing to remember about special ed, and that is that there is a reimbursement program from the state called the Circuit Breaker. But that reimbursement program only kicks in after the first $40,000 per student. So if we have a student who's receiving services at an out-of-district placement, and those services cost us $39,000, then we pay the whole thing. If those services cost us, for example, $50,000, then we get reimbursed for the difference. But the reimbursement is not dollar for dollar. When the Circuit Breaker program was originally designed, it was designed to be a 100% reimbursement from the state. But as we all know, those reimbursement levels do not hold. The Circuit Breaker is currently reimbursed at about 60%. So that's called an underfunded mandate. What concerns me in this particular budget is the downward pressure that the special ed budget is placing on the rest of the school services. It is squeezing out the funding that we allocate to our regular day students and placing a disproportionate level of funding away from our regular day programs. My hope, as we heard last night, because special ed is a volatile item in our budget, my hope is that this unusual strain is temporary. But I will tell you that the Finance Committee spent a lot of time talking about this, and we have made a commitment to reach out to our school officials over the summer to really study ways that we can rein in this rapidly escalating cost, because this rate of growth is clearly not sustainable. In terms of Silver Lake, the issues are different. First off, the state sets the minimum amount that our school district must spend on public education to provide what they call an adequate education for the 1,200 students who attend our middle and our high school. That's called a foundation budget. And then the state computes another number. For each of the 3 towns of our district, they compute the minimum amount that each town must contribute to that school system. That's called the minimum contribution. Well, for Kingston, we saw a significant increase in the minimum amount that we are required to contribute for FY18. On top of that, the number of Kingston students going to Silver Lake continues to outpace the enrollment from both Halifax and Plimpton. This means that we take on a higher share of funding the Silver Lake budget because we have the highest share of students attending those schools. Both of those changes have resulted in an almost $500,000 increase before we even looked at anything else in the Silver Lake budget, like contractual obligations, utility expenses, or trying to grow some services, which didn't happen. So yes, we've had some significant impacts from the school department this year. But in addition to those impacts, you have to remember that this budget that we are talking about tonight also reflects the cumulative impact of all previous town meetings. So let me give you an example. In FY16, not too long ago, Town meeting approved 3 part-time positions for $90,000. Last year, you, town meeting, approved an assistant director at the senior center for $19,000. That was $109,000 that you approved in additional wages. Does anybody know how much that's going to cost us for those 4 positions in the FY18 budget? About $280,000. And that's probably a conservative number because it doesn't even include post-employment benefits and some of the supplies and materials and workstations and what have you that go along with establishing new staff. So you have to remember the cumulative impact of decisions that we make here. Let's talk about revenues for a minute, because to me, it's the most important thing about building a budget. The town focuses an awful lot of energy on how we're going to spend money, but I think that we need to change the dialogue, and we need to focus on revenues, because without them, we won't have any services. 71% of our revenues come directly from taxes. 14% of our revenues come from fees, excises, and other charges that you pay, like dump stickers, dog licenses, ambulance rides. Those are all called local receipts. And then there's state aid. About 11% of our budget comes from the state. And year over year, a lot of us want to blame the state for our budget woes. Folks want to argue away some of our tax problems because the state isn't giving us enough money. Well, we have enough empirical evidence to show that our trend with state aid is not changing. It has been flat for a number of years, and it's not going anywhere but flat. As we heard from Representative Coulter last night, the state revenues are well below expectation. If anybody's been following along, you'll know that the state has not hit a revenue benchmark yet for FY17. And in fact, the state's budget gap has doubled from $220 million to $462 million for the current fiscal year. It remains to be seen how the state is going to respond to this deficit, but I highly doubt they're going to forego the $18 million in pay raises. I expect the governor to be making 9C cuts this year, and I expect to see some new creative taxes, fees, or other assessments that we will end up paying. So as a result of the state revenue situation, Kingston's net state aid for next year has increased by a paltry 1%, or $67,000. As for other revenues, over the last several years, this town has not generated any new revenue streams that would make a noticeable impact in our budget. In fact, as we heard last night, the $230,000 that we had been collecting from the KWI turbine is not coming in. So when I tell you that we have a revenue problem, it's because we have a revenue problem. So let's talk about grants for a second. When we rely on grants to fund our operating expenses and those grants go away, we are asked to absorb the impact. So for example, up until last year, the library trustees had been funding a number of things in the library budget, and that was great. But the funding dried up last year. And in last year's budget, we absorbed the impact of those costs, and there were no cuts in services. Today, we're currently receiving a $90,000 grant from Entergy for the Pilgrim Power Plant. We all know that the power plant is scheduled to go offline June 30th of 2019, and we will be losing that grant shortly thereafter. The problem is that that grant is embedded into the fire department, so when that grant goes away, the town is going to ask you to pick up that burden. Unless we agree to seriously control our budget and make some cuts, which may in fact end up being cuts in services, then you're going to see those increases absorbed in your tax bill. So while it's important to understand what's in the budget, we also need to understand what's not in the budget, because these items will be coming before us in the very near future. We all know that there's been some major construction projects that are being evaluated, and we have to ask ourselves, can we afford them, and do we need them? There's a police station for $10 million, a library for $15 million, potential sewer expansion for $15 million, a replacement on the Kingston Elementary School roof for $7 million, and a number of other projects. Our townwide capital plan still has some very expensive items, including parking lot and sidewalk reconstruction at the elementary and intermediate school. The school systems need a new phone system and new fire and alarm suppression systems. So we've got some major expenses that we know about. The Silver Lake School District has a capital plan, a very expensive capital plan, and they will be coming to us looking for some funding to assist with that. We have a master plan that's still in the works, and we have no idea yet what initiatives will come of that. We have a lot of articles in this warrant that are going to ask you to fund some fairly expensive projects. And we need to continue to ask ourselves, can we afford this, and do we need this? From a personnel standpoint, there's a compensation study for our wage and personnel employees that's currently in progress. This will undoubtedly result in some cost increases. All of our union contracts are expiring and need to be renegotiated. Silver Lake just settled with their teachers' union contract, and we will be feeling the impact of those negotiations in future budgets. So how does all of that impact your taxes? The average single-family home here in Kingston for FY17 is valued at $363,000. We rank in the top 40% for value statewide. Our average single-family tax bill is $6,000. We rank in the top 30% for taxes statewide. And when you look at what we pay in taxes compared to our per capita income, we are in the top 22% of the state for per capita income spent on taxes. That means essentially 80% of the state spends less of their per capita income on taxes than we do here in the town of Kingston. This budget will increase your tax bills by no less than 3.5%, or right now approximately $215. But bear in mind, we will be having a fall town meeting where you may be asked to fund even more, and that will go into your FY18 tax bill. Now, Kingston is a town of very, very smart people. We are a town of leaders. We are a town of trailblazers. But one contest that we don't want to win is the one where we spend the most in taxes. But these statistics clearly indicate that our tax burden is high. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Is this town growing? You bet. But is our non-residential tax base growing? And the answer is no, not enough to defray the significant increases that we are paying year over year. Now, I wasn't going to talk about tax rates, but there's been an awful lot of discussion about tax rates online, in the newspapers, on TV. So I want to spend a minute to just discuss this and deal with it head on. I'm not going to tell you whether Kingston has a tax rate that's too high, too low, or just right, because a tax rate, when considered by itself, really means nothing. So let me give you an example. The town of Adams, way out in the Berkshires, charges $21.37 for a residential tax rate. And some of you are saying, oh my God, I'd never pay that tax rate, $21.37. Well, then there's Chilmark on the Vineyard, and their tax rate is $2.68 per thousand. Now that sounds a lot more appealing, doesn't it? But what if I told you that the average home value in Adams is $146,000, and the average home value in Chilmark is $1.9 million? Does that change your mind? What if I told you that the town of Kingston pays more in taxes than both of those communities? So the bottom line is that you can tell very little from a tax rate on its own. The only two things that matter are, number one, the town budget, and number two, the value of your property and all of our properties in the town. So when you think about a tax rate, just remember that it's not nearly as important as our taxes and our services. Sorry. You are the legislative body of our town. Maybe you didn't know that, but you are. Town meeting is the legislative body of our town. You make the decisions. So we need you to speak up here at town meeting. But we need you to be practical, not emotional in our decision-making, and we need you to tell us what you value in town. What can you live without, and what can you not live without? And I will say that we also need to be careful here at town meeting. When somebody gets up and says that, hey, that new service or that new position sounds like a great idea, and it's only going to cost me $20, $30, or $40 on my tax bill, well, sure, come on, guys, let's approve it. But then when that keeps happening over and over, and as I explained to you before, the cost impact of some of those decisions all equates to an excessive budget growth, and we need to keep that in mind when we make decisions here at town meeting. So while our overall financial portfolio looks incredibly healthy, the Finance Committee firmly believes that we need to do better in managing our spending increases. We have held strong in our resolve that we will not tax up to the full 2.5%, and we have not for the last several years. This budget leaves almost $760,000 of unused taxes. The Finance Committee will continue to fight hard for fiscal conservatism until we can start seeing some additional revenue streams to offset the burden from our residential taxpayers in a meaningful way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McKinnon. Okay, let's move on. Again, we have a lot of articles to cover. The Board of Selectmen voted favorable 5-0-0. Finance Committee voted favorable 7-0-0 for the budget. I'm going to, as we traditionally do, I'm going to read the line items. And if you want to hold something, I need you to stand, yell hold, and then I need a name. Moderator, personal services, only $100. Selectmen, personal services, 306, I need to finish. 366,396. Who? Selectmen, expenses, $65,200. Finance Committee, personal services, $6,500. Finance Committee, expenses, $1,250. Reserve Fund, expenses only, $100,000. Capital Planning, personal services only, $420. $429, sorry. Town Accountant, personal services, $143,633. Town Accountant, expenses, $2,880. Assessors, personal services, $121,539. Assessors, expenses, $15,000. Revaluation, expenses only, $20,000. Treasurer, personal services, $180,101. Treasurer, expenses, $28,785. Collector, personal services, $117,032. Collector, expenses, $32,480. I apologize, I have a cold and I need to get rid of my cough drop. I feel like I'm in school and they didn't have me take it out. So that ended with collector's expenses, $32,480. Legal expenses only, $150,000. Wage and personnel, personal services only, $6,500. I can't hear you. You need to yell. On which one?
Legal expenses.
And who's holding?
John Michael Fox.
Thank you. Wage and personnel, personal services only, $6,500. Data processing, personal services, $65,816. Data processing expenses, $176,650. No, that was good. Thank you, Heather. Tax title, everybody around her is probably thinking. Tax title expenses only, $30,000. Town clerk, personal services, $143,348. Town clerk expenses, $11,927. Elections, personal services, $12,000. Elections, expenses, $20,758. Conservation, personal services, $110,612. Conservation expenses, $3,725. Planning, personal services, $98,579. Planning expenses, $5,300. ZBA, personal services, $6,500. ZBA expenses, $277. Rent control, personal services only, $1,000. Green energy, expenses only, $800. General operators, formerly known as Care of Muni, there's no personal services. Expenses only, $157,000. Facilities, personal services, $218,596.
Hold. Name? Did someone want to give a name? Because I did too.
Well, okay. Facilities expenses, $392,270.
Hold. John Michael Fonz.
Police, personal services, $3,022,419. Police expenses, $202,300. Fire, personal services, $2,113,743.
Hold. Daniel Harlow.
Fire expenses, $291,810.
Hold. Daniel Harlow.
Inspection services, personal services, $122,579. Inspection services expenses, $2,025. Sealers, weights, and measures, personal services, $8,191. Sealers, weights, and measures expenses, $1,320. Animal control, personal services, $73,010. Animal control expenses, $4,500. Harbor master, personal services, $65,348. Harbor master expenses, $27,525. Silver Lake assessment, $8,852,825. Silver Lake debt service, $841,860. KES schools, $7,936,150. KES special education, $4,958,885.
Hold. Daniel Harlow.
Vocational. It doesn't say if it's expenses or personal services, $198,000.
Hold. Daniel Harlow.
Streets, trees, and parks, personal services, $667,516. Streets, trees, and parks, expenses, $283,625.
Hold. David Fuller.
Fuller?
Yep.
Snow and ice, personal services, $70,000. Snow and ice, expenses, $250,000. Street lighting, expenses only, $38,000. Solid waste, personal services, $178,441. Solid waste expenses, $370,690. Board of Health, personal services, $117,365. Board of Health expenses, $16,525. Council on Aging, personal services, $230,394. Kramer? Council on Aging expenses, $29,943. Veterans Benefit, personal services, $44,578. Veterans Benefit expenses, $319,901. Commission on Disability expenses only, $1,010. Library, personal services, $479,798. Library expenses, $131,463. Adams Center, expenses only, $10,493. Recreation, personal services, $179,881. Recreation expenses, $55,875. Historic Commission, expenses only $510. Local Historic District, expenses only $500. Cooperative Extension, expenses only $500. Debt Services, expenses $2,477,593.
Hold. John Michael Fonz.
Can you do anything with debt services? Employee benefits, personal services, $5,446,377. I got two. Who was the other? Employee benefits, expenses, $77,600. Liability property insurance expenses, $387,000. Non-town net metering expenses, $2,200,000.
Hold. Daniel Harlow.
For a grand total of $45,601,050. Those are it. So now what we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen, because I have some that are duplicate holds, to try to facilitate, I'm going to be calling them out, but I'm going to ask you if you've held a couple of them, when you get up, to actually address all of the ones that you're holding so that we can move along in our discussion here. All right, starting with line item, the first one, Selectmen Personal Services, Ms. Boyer.
Thank you. I would like to, actually, my two holds for the Selectmen and the Planning Board are tied together.
Yep.
I would like to request that $35,155.75 be held back and placed back in the Planning Board budget. We are struggling right now with staff, with a secretary, administrative assistant. There's been a lot of transfer in and out. There's people who have left the position. It's been very, very challenging for the planning board, and we would like a full-time position. We know that that's not likely possible, but if the money goes into the selectmen's budget for personal services, we will not get that money back anytime soon, and I am advocating very strongly that we keep that money in the planning board budget, so when we get a person that we can hire full-time who can support not just the planning board, but the master plan and Tom and all of the things that he has to do for the town, energy, affordable housing trust, all of that stuff. I feel very, very, very strongly that we need a full-time or close to full-time person in the planning board. So that is my hold for both planning board and the selectmen.
Okay, Ms. Boyer, I need you back at the microphone for a minute. I understand then that you are making a motion to amend the budget, and I'm going to need you to come down and say what you're doing. So, because
Okay.
you've just made it, so I'm going to take that as a motion to amend.
Yes, ma'am.
But I need you to come down front, and you need to write motion
Okay.
to amend. But I need to clarify one issue with you, is that I understand that you want to take it from the Selectmen's Personal Services, but your second hold was on planning
The
board
planning board.
expenses.
I'm
So
sorry,
is-
it should have been on personal services, I'm sorry.
Okay, so you want it to go from
The
the
selectmen,
personal services to the other personal
planning
services?
board
That's what I
personal
assumed, but I
services.
wanted to make sure that that's what you were doing.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay.
What was the amount, to?
I believe it's 35,155.75.
Right here. All right, so if you can come down front and do that motion while I get a second, and we deal with that issue right away. I have a second on that motion to amend? So there's a motion to amend with a second on that. At this point, you heard Ms. Boyer. Do we have any further debate? Mr. Wilson, I'm sorry, I almost called you Ms. Wilson. Our town administrator, Mr. Fennessy.
Good evening. My name's Robert Fennessy. I'm the town administrator. And I just want to give you an idea how this came to play. About a year ago, we had 4 retirements in the administrative assistant grouping down in the town hall. And I used that as an opportunity to look at all the positions and see if there was a way to reduce the number of positions, as well as look at ways to increase efficiency amongst all the employees there. At times in town hall, and probably any business, there's busy times and there's not so busy times. And I would see the not so busy times with people with not a lot to do. So we decided to work with the HR and the union to look at these positions and see if we can take one of those positions out of the group as well as turn one into a floater position. And that's the position that Ms. Boyer is talking about. So during that negotiation, it was decided that we could do that. The union was okay with that, which was surprising in a way. But we took that position so that we can then move that position, house it in planning, which it has been and it will remain, but take it during those slow times and put it into other positions, maybe filling a sickness or a vacation, or if there was another department that needed assistance to do a project, they can move into that department, rather than just sitting idle waiting for something to do. So that was behind this plan. It wasn't any kind of covert thing that we were trying to do, and I don't think she's even implying that. But it gives us the ability to move people around as needed. We did that with the second position that we hired. We made that also a floater, and in my perfect world, every department who has an administrative staff would have a floater attached to that, would be the administrative staff, would also be able to float and be trained in other departments so they can move around as needed. I mean, to me, it's ridiculous to have people stuck in a department when there's not a lot to do. And just on that, the past four planning board administrative staff people that left, in their exit interviews, they all said the same thing, that it doesn't seem like it's a full-time job need. There's times when there's not a lot to do. There's times like right now where it's crazy in planning. So my goal is to not only have that floater, but also to be able to float into the planning board. And I told Mr. Bott this, when he has issues like around town meeting, where he needs other people to help him. So it's a grand scheme of being able to utilize our administrative staff more efficiently and at less cost to the taxpayers, basically. So that's how we got to where we are.
Thank you, Mr. Fennessy. Mr. Wilson, and then Mr. Bott, I didn't know if you wanted to, as our town planner, did you want to address it? You don't have to. I'm just giving you that opportunity. You're good, okay. Mr. Wilson?
Thanks. Just following up a little bit on what Bob had said, the more that we cross-train our employees, the less employees hopefully we can have. That's the very short gist of the intent of that position. That said, we also have to make sure that we address our needs. And it had been a little bit of a surprise to me, so maybe shame on me, that I had recently heard of Tom's concern about his staffing. And within the last 2 weeks, we sat down in his office and started a dialogue about, from his perspective, that this wasn't working. And to the extent that he needs more support, to the extent that the person who is sitting as, his assistant, but is also the floater, is not being attentive enough or what have you directly to that department, as I expressed to him, we certainly can work on that. I don't think that it's something that we want to unwind without thinking fully through in this setting. But I have committed to him, I will recommit to you in front of town meeting and the Almighty, to make sure that there's sufficient staffing, however we need to make that work. But I do think that we moved in this direction with an actual purpose in mind of saving the taxpayer money, also having our employees have multiple skill sets so that we can make sure that people aren't bored, are fully engaged, and can move up, hopefully, and do more both for the town and for themselves. If it's not working and the planning board needs more support, the board is fully committed to trying everything and anything that we can do to make sure that need is met. So,
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Ms. Boyer?
Just one more thing. I fully respect the town's efforts to create floater positions to save the town money. I am 100% behind that. But this conversation has been going on since last summer, and I feel that while we are making efforts to conserve, we're not thinking clearly about skill sets and the time it takes to train someone, the learning curve that becomes involved in training someone to do what needs to be done in the planning board. I understand there's downtime, that's true almost everywhere, but when there isn't downtime, in order to get someone up to speed takes time. And that time, I feel, has been somewhat wasted because a floater can't possibly have a skill set for every department that they might need to work in. And I am very concerned that if this money goes to the selectmen, that the money will never come back to the planning board when things pick up, as they are right now. We are crazy in the planning board. We have things coming our way that are going to take Tom's time and require someone who can not just answer the phone and do secretarial, but really can take on being the point person for Tom in his office. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Boyer. Sir? Yes?
Gary Langenbach, 164 Elm Street. I have been on the Conservation Commission for a long time. I am currently the representative of the commission to Master Plan. I occasionally attend a planning board meeting, and I have seen the difference of not having a full-time assistant and the effect it has on the planning board's abilities. And I recommend that people support this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Langenbach. Ms. Hoag?
Fran Hoig, 394 Elm Street. I'm in agreement with Mr. Langenbach. I understand the issue of the floater. I respect the issue of the floater. But in certain offices, the person who's sitting at that desk is not just answering phones. In the case of the planning department, that's a very important department, and if a mistake is made with maps or any of the information that you need, you're in big trouble. I know one year we had an article that came forward and the maps were all wrong. The information was given, the maps were all wrong, and we had to throw the article out, and it caused a lot of distress to a lot of people. So I respect the idea of the floater. I know what you're trying to do, but my question is, have you really looked at which offices absolutely 100% could use a floater type position, and which departments absolutely 100% need an actual trained person who's there all the time? Because my concern is when you say, well, the floater, the person's assigned to planning, but if somebody's out on vacation or somebody's out sick, we're going to take that person from planning and put them over there. Then what happens in the planning department while that person is gone for a week or 2 weeks? Or 3 weeks. I understand what Ms. Boyer is saying, and I support her on that. This is a position that needs to be trained. The person who's there needs to know what they're doing. And whether you resolve it from your end or it gets resolved here at town meeting, I think you really need to look at that.
Thank you. Mr. Fons?
First, I just wanted to get clarification.
Name and address.
Oh, sorry. John Michael Font, 16 May Avenue. I just want to get clarification first. Does the motion seek to actually create a full-time position, or is it just to change where the money's going?
Change where the money's going. The money used to be in the planning board budget, then it got moved to the selectmen so that they could do this shared position. The planning board's asking for it to go back in their budget.
Okay, because to me it was just a little confusing discussing like the floater versus the full-time, if that's
Not
not
a new position.
issue right now.
Right.
So with that being said, I would like to just see if we could have some light drawn onto what the intention of those funds are for the Board of Selectmen, because I appreciate.
That's what Mr. Wilson directed, that it's about being able to have somebody cross-trained. You can address it again if you want. We're trying to kind of move this along a little.
Just to clarify, it's the exact same job. It's the exact same person who's currently hired. It's just somebody who has now, for the past 3 months, been cross-trained so that they sit in the planning board office, but as needs, for instance, Board of Health, somebody goes out on an inspection, the office needs to be covered. We have somebody who is trained and is not designated and staffed solely within the planning board and is able to go and fill in this spot and fill in that spot, instead of us hiring another person who then has to be the one to make those decisions. And also, just to clarify, as far as thinking through each spot, you know, as Bob had said, the last 4 people who were the full-time person in this role, in their exit interviews and even in voicing, you know, during the time that they were there, at times felt underutilized, understaffed. That's not necessarily true currently, because we have, you know, the economy's come back and we do have some projects going on, and maybe there's a staffing need now that for the current period of time we need more focus. But it's also worth noting that this was something that was negotiated with the union, and this position is actually now under the union contract a floater. Even if we made this change and put the budget item there, this is a floater.
Okay. Well, thank you for
you.
your efforts to try to save money for the taxpayers. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fonz. Any further debate? Seeing none, we're now acting on Ms. Boyer's motion to amend to take $35,155.75 from the Board of Selectmen's personal services line item and adding it to the Planning Board's personal services line item. So all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. We're going to have to count it. Counters, tellers, if you can come down front. Let's try to, look at me, move this quick. You're not that old, come on.
Yes, they are.
I know, Mr. Armstrong, you've retired and all, but you know. All those in favor of the motion to amend? Blue cards in the air. Mr. Basler?
29.
Mr. Basler is 29. Mr. Pepe? Mr. Pepe is 19. Mr. Armstrong? 16. Mr. Armstrong is 16. All those opposed to the motion to amend? Yep. Mr. Basler?
25.
Mr. Basler is 25. Mr. Pepe? I'm sorry, there was coughing? 25 for Mr. Pepe as well. Mr. Armstrong? 32 for Mr. Armstrong. So the motion does not carry with 82 in opposition and 64 in for. So that takes care of 2 of our holds. Moving on, Mr. Fonce, I believe you have 1, 2, 3. You have 3, so you're going to start with legal, then you're going to move right on to facilities, expenses, and debt servicing. Mr. Fonce.
Okay, so for the legal, I was just trying to get more understanding of what exactly that entails. It's pretty broad, just legal services, so I'm trying to understand
Do you want to talk about
where that money's going, what it's being used for.
Okay. I'll have town council address it. It's his contract.
Partly.
Well, yeah.
My firm is Town Council, and we have a set fee, monthly contract that is not hourly with the town. It is just a set amount. Then there's special counsel to the town for labor services and other potential services that is on other different arrangements. So that's the town's essentially, that's our legal team. So mine is a set amount every year. It's been the same amount for 3 or 4 years now. And then the rest is a little bit more fungible because it's based more on hourly rates and can go up and down a little bit depending upon what the town needs for labor and other services.
And how does that division look in terms of percentage?
The general legal budget is the largest chunk of it. So mine is, my contract is $7,000 a month, and the remainder is the remainder of whatever the town projects for their needs for the year.
So that means his is 84,000 and the remainder is,
66.
yeah, I always do it on the calculator, 66, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So that resolves your issue under legal?
Don't go anywhere.
Mr. Fonce, that's your issue under legal, correct?
That's it for me. I don't know if someone else wants to speak.
No, you held it, it's your call, it's your issue, so you've said that that's your answer.
Okay, but is it open to other folks as well, or?
Well, there's no motion to amend.
Motion to amend.
You don't make a motion to, fine. Come on, people, we're trying to move this, he held it, you now want to talk about legal as well?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, then, but I'm trying to get from Mr. Fonce, that's it for you, though.
That's it for me.
Thank you.
Let him speak, please.
Thank you.
Well, he shouldn't go anywhere, but he has two other homes.
Now, I know, Mr. Fonce, don't go too far, you still have two other things to address. That's why I wanted you to address them all at once. So go ahead.
This could address my other issue. So,
And you are, name and address?
David Fuller, 233 Country Club Way.
You're addressing legal right now.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
My question is, how many active suits is the town currently involved in?
God.
There are some that are handled through insurance, some through labor, and some through my firm. I don't have the exact number off the top of my head. We do an annual report on that, probably, and litigation some of it we could be in suit but not really be spending much money on it, depending upon how passive we are as a party in the case. At any given point in time, maybe 5 or 6 pieces of litigation, most of which isn't very active. Our main base when we're in a trial mode, it is certainly, we're more active, but otherwise our advice is more in a general nature where we're helping out with the boards and the committees. The labor has some active litigation probably and has some projected perhaps, but also a lot more on the negotiation end than anything.
Can I question specific legal matter?
No,
No.
it's not permitted to be discussed.
Okay.
All right.
I'll come back on my other point then.
Okay.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Wilson, you wanted to address that as well, or are we all set that was taken care of? Because it's been taken care of.
Well, I was just going to say, because he's only the town council side, on the labor council side, we have in the neighborhood of around 4 active suits, so.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Fonce, you also had facilities, let me go back here, legal.
Yeah, facilities, expenses.
You had facilities expenses.
Yes, just the exact same situation. I'd just like to understand a little bit more about what's entailed with all that.
With the facilities expenses?
Yes, ma'am.
So does, let me see, who wants to address that? Mary McKinnon, do you want to address that, or is our facilities, is Brad here? Does he want to address that, or is somebody else going to? Brad, you're in the back, you want to do it? Okay. Why don't you come all the way down front? I know you just came from that side, but. Sure. Yeah, you should come down front. I just, we've had some that people like people to come down front, but you can't see. And just so everybody knows about the lighting, I did check with our facilities here at the school, Brian, who's wonderful, that these are all burnt out, believe it or not. And that's why we can't turn them on. So that's been a situation, I guess, for quite a while. And I myself will make a call to the school about changing light bulbs. So, yeah, I'm sorry, Miss Superintendent, can you take care of the light bulbs? Because I know people were saying they can't see, and some of that is right where the microphones are, so. Brad, can you announce yourself? Thank you.
Sure. Bradford Norman, 38 Summer Street, and I'm the facilities manager for the town. What was the questions you had?
I just want to understand just a little bit more details in terms of what this money is being used for.
Okay. These are existing funds. The first set is the personal services.
No, he only held expenses.
Oh, expenses.
Right,
Okay.
he held expenses, so we're dealing with that, and then I'll have, yep.
Question again, you want to know more specifics about?
What's in the facilities budget?
The
In other words,
destination
what
of
does
the
it
funds.
include?
Please.
Okay, I got it, thanks. Yep. I'm going to give you the whole list of everything that we do, and then if you want to go over figures, we can. It covers electricity for all the buildings and departments in the town. It's the gas and heating for all the facilities, buildings in the town, sewer, property repairs and maintenance, property repairs. There's one budget now, this is the old one. Contractual services, equipment rentals, rubbish removal. It entails property management supplies, tools and supplies, land management and equipment and lease and purchases.
Okay, great.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you. Now, Mr. Fonz, hold a second, because we also had a, no, I think you were the only one on facilities expenses. Ms. Romano, were you on expenses or personal services?
Personal services.
Okay, we'll go,
He was on debt service.
yeah, we'll just move on. We'll keep you, hold tight.
here.
Mr. Norman, don't go too far, just you might want to step back. Mr. Fonz, moving on to debt services.
Same situation. I just wanted to understand a little bit more. Actually, I don't even know what that is, so I'd maybe just start like, what is that?
Okay, Ms. McKinnon can cover that. So, Mr. Norman, you'll have to step back so Ms. McKinnon can step up. Just lean back on the, there you go, perfect.
So, debt service is the amount that we pay on borrowings. So for certain projects that have been done, and some have been done many, many years ago, when we go out to borrow money to fund the cost of certain projects, the payment of that is our annual debt service. So it's like a mortgage. Every month you pay your mortgage. Every month we pay our debt service. So some of the things that we're paying for in terms of borrowings that have happened, the list here includes Grays Beach drainage, the closure of the landfill, the senior center, townhouse, the school, the Kingston Elementary School, as well as our subsidy for the wastewater treatment plant. So those are some of the things that we've borrowed for, and this is our annual debt service to pay back that borrowing.
I do have a question, if I may.
Sure.
Just procedurally speaking, I mean, obviously this is going to get voted on. So what if this were voted against? How would that money get paid? Because as you said, we owe it, right? It's a debt.
We do.
We're contractually obligated, and if town council wants to address that.
We would be in default.
Yeah, you can't. I mean,
Yeah.
we're contractual. We'd be in default of a contract.
I understand that, but we are voting on it, correct?
Correct.
So what if it gets voted down? How does the town deal with paying that
Other
debt?
departments would suffer.
Yep.
The money would be found elsewhere, basically.
Correct.
You would, for $2.4 million, you would decimate some departments. This is a contractual obligation based on projects that town meeting has authorized, has indicated that they want the town to pursue. We all agreed at the time that those projects were undertaken that we would incur this debt service for the life of those projects.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Appreciate
Absolutely.
it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fonz. Now going back to our next hold, Ms. Romano, if you don't mind, you've got a couple. I'm going to start you at data processing expenses, and then you can move on to facilities, personal services.
Thank you. Heather Romano, 8 Dillingham Way. So data processing, I'm just noticing things call out to me when the percentages have gone up significantly. So I was just wondering why there was a 95% increase in data processing, if somebody could clarify what went into that.
Well, the one you had, did you hold expenses or personal services? 'Cause-
Personal services.
Okay, so I had you on expenses.
sorry.
All right, that's okay. We'll move you up there.
I screamed my name out and
That's
I'm used to
okay.
yelling at my kids that way.
So it's personal services, if you don't mind, Ms. McKinnon.
Sure, absolutely. When the information technology position was originally proposed to town meeting, it was proposed at a part-time position. It was recently authorized to convert to a full-time position, so the impact that you're seeing is the cost to convert from a part-time to full-time.
Thank you.
Sure.
Now, Ms. Romano, does that solve your question under data service, personal
Yeah,
services?
thank you.
Okay, that's resolved, so now we're going to move you on to facilities, personal services. Let Ms. Romano mention what she's concerned with.
It's pretty much the same question. It went up 253% for personal services. Just curious if that's another staff add or you're adding employment.
It actually
employees.
didn't go up. In my budget, it went up 156,706, and that is the transfer of the positions that are already existing. There's 5 facilities positions, 2 in the recreation department, 1 at the COA, 1 at the library, part-time at the library, and 1 at the townhouse. Those 5 positions have been transferred over to me. This is the transfer of funds, which came out of other funds that went lower. It was taken out of their funds. So if you look under their budget, you'll see that there's a less money in their salaries budget.
Mr. Norman, is that the custodial staff?
That's the custodial staff,
It's the
yes.
existing custodial staff. shipped
Custodial
over
and
from one
facilities
budget.
maintenance staff.
So essentially, it's a line item transfer.
It's a transfer of money, yes.
Okay, thank you. That's
You're
all I
welcome.
needed.
Thank you, Ms. Romano. Does that solve you under the personal services for facilities? Yes. All right, then moving up, Mr. Gallagher, you had it. Did you have that question?
I just wanted people to understand what it was.
He solved that as well. Under the fire department, Mr. Hollow, Daniel Hollow, we have you for personal services and expenses. I also have you for special ed and vocational, I believe are yours, as well as employee benefits, personal services, and non-town net metering. So let's start with you off at fire personal services.
Thank you. Daniel Harlow, 31 Howlands Lane. Just a clarification question in terms of the process in general. If someone puts a hold on something, only they're allowed to speak to it. If you want to speak to it as well, you should also request a hold. I just want to make sure for...
In the future?
In the future?
Yes.
Okay. That being said, just touching upon what Ms. McKinnon had discussed about tax rates and whatnot and the differences. The average home value in 2007 was $407,000, 319.
Well, Mr. Hollow, we're on the fire department,
Yeah,
so this is about personal services under the fire department?
correct. It goes to the overarching notions of all the items that I've put holds on.
Okay, so you're going to cover them broadly, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So the average tax burden in 2007 was $4,199.
Hold on 1 second.
Sure.
1 minute, the town clerk is just trying to,
Just for
Sure.
maintaining some structure here, can you tell us which ones you're gonna clarify now in the general broad sense?
So in terms of...
I'll read them.
So it's gonna be
Wait,
fire?
1 second,
Okay.
one second. Mr. Hollow,
Yes.
would you like me to read the ones you held, and that's what you're covering?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, so if I can, he's covering fire personal services,
Okay.
fire expenses.
Okay.
He's covered KES, KIS, special ed. He's covered vocational. He's covering employee benefits, personal services, non-town net metering expenses. Oh, sorry. Employee benefits, personal services, and non-town net metering.
He's not gonna do anything before that. Is that the idea?
Yes.
Thank you, I just
Okay.
needed to make sure that
Sure
we're
thing.
keeping this track of this.
So go ahead, Mr. Hollow. Thank you for your patience.
No problem. So I'll just somewhat summarize it. Since 2007, the average home value has decreased 10.75%, and the tax burden has increased on average 42.84%. And I think that's something that's very important to keep in mind when people vote on the budget. Any discussions or amendments is the notion that, again, you're paying 42.84% more than you were paying 10 years ago. And I don't think that anybody's seen that kind of increase in their own personal salaries. So again, it does put more strain on the individuals, and I just think that's a very important matter to keep in mind. With regard specifically to the public safety under fire and personal expenses, as Ms. McKinnon had pointed out, that the Pilgrim Power Plant provides approximately $90,000 to the town of Kingston, and that will be ending in 2019. I just think that it would be better to ease that loss in money over time, so I'd like to make a motion on that to remove $45,000 from the fire personal services and expenses, in
Well,
order.
you have to be very
You have to do
clear.
from one or the,
1 second, Mr. Heller.
Sure.
Are you moving to amend you moving to amend to remove 45,000 from the fire department's personal services? Line
Correct.
item?
correct.
Okay, because then you mentioned expenses. They're two different line items.
Sorry, then I'll split it. 27,500 from the personal services and 27,500 from the expenses. Sorry, I'm terrible at math.
No, that's,
22.5.
yep. What, you didn't bring one for all of us? No, that's just so cute. Thank you. Huh? Yes, what we're going to do is I'm going to have, in Mr. Hallow, while this is up and going, you're actually doing two motions, so I'm going to actually do one motion at a time.
That's fine.
Do it all as one? Okay. I'm being ruled over here, so I will say that's fine. Motion to amend, dual. I now need you to come down front, and you need to write it out. I'm only doing this one. We can't do that. You can't. So that motion to amend in regard to the fire department, 22,500 removed from personal services and 22,500 removed from fire expenses. So that having been seconded, and Mr. Wilson, you want to start addressing that first, and then I was trying to see if our, yes. So Mr. Wilson?
I mainly want to introduce the discussion and hand it over to,
I'll do that. So either you're talking or you're not. I mean, I'm just trying to keep this moving. So either you're talking, I was going to the chief.
I will talk briefly.
Okay.
And I do believe that I would speak for the board in saying that we would certainly oppose this. It would essentially mean, without any thought, discussion within their department, looking at our staffing needs, et cetera, firing a firefighter, and not having a full staff, or at least thinking through whether or not, or we'd be giving significant pay cuts, which we have union contract obligations that we then would not be able to fulfill. It's not the kind of thing that we can just haphazardly do. A lot of thought and planning went into this. A lot of thought and planning goes into our staffing needs. And certainly, I defer to the acting chief.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Hollow, I just want to say, is the permission to amend your written motion to say motion to amend to remove 22,005? Thank you. So with that permission, I'm moving on with the next one. Chief Douglas, if you could address what that impact would have.
The impact of, first thing I'd like to clarify, if I could, is the Kingston Emergency Management, the grant that goes for KEMA, does not fund the fire side. It does not fund personal services or expenses on the fire department side of the budget. It strictly runs Kingston Emergency Management. That's what that grant is used for. In terms of operations for us...
Can you tell us, Chief, before you go further, where is that in the budget?
It would be under a separate budget. Kingston Emergency Management is a separate budget that's submitted separately as a grant budget.
So where is it in our budget?
It doesn't go through the general fund right now.
Pardon me?
It's a grant, so it does not go through the general fund.
So it's not in our budget?
Correct.
Okay, so emergency services is not, I'm just making this clear for everyone. Emergency services is not in this budget, and whoever's paid under emergency services is not in this budget.
Emergency management.
And emergency management. You're saying it's not in this budget?
The cost for that is not in this budget.
Okay. Thank you. Good.
So to move on, in other words, to take several $1,000s to this extent out of a fire department operating budget would significantly limit our ability to respond to calls, both on the personnel side and on the ability to maintain the apparatus and to supply the needed supplies we need to do our jobs. Simply put, that's what it would create. It would decimate our ability to respond to emergencies. Back a few months ago, some of you may have seen a presentation I made with regards to ambulance billing and the restructuring of that. Part of what we did was restructure ambulance billing and restructure the way we respond to calls in such a way that we are actually creating additional revenue. The way we split up our staff when we have a full 5-person staff is to run them in such a way that they can go back to the station if they're on a call, grab the second ambulance and respond to a call. when you look at our payer mix and all the things that are involved with billing, we recognize that a little bit more money created a significant increase in revenue because of our ability to handle those calls. So to take not only that away, but to dip into the already existing level service budget would create a significant effect on services in a very, very negative fashion.
Thank you, Chief Douglas. Mr. Hollow, now hearing that the emergency management services is not, and part of that grant is not in the budget, do you have a particular motion to, do you want to go forward with your motion to amend, or you want to withdraw it?
So after that explanation and understanding, my understanding was that it was part of the current budget that we were voting on, so I'd like to withdraw the amendment on that particular motion.
Thank you, Mr. Hollow. I'll take that as a motion to, withdraw his motion to amend. He's just withdrawing his motion to amend, and we'll take that as a procedural, so nothing further on that. Thank you, Mr. Hollow. So now, Mr. Hollow, you were addressing, I'm assuming then that solves your fire
Correct.
department side. Now you had KES, KIS, special education.
Yes, so I did have a similar question as to last night. I know that there's explanation that we're trying to keep those costs under the special education under control. I do understand that this is a significant increase, and it seems to be hopefully a one-time increase. But again, I think the question still goes to the school committee or those in charge as to when is enough, because I don't believe that answer. That question was truly answered last night. I mean, if there's not an answer, it's okay to say we don't really have an answer at this time. But I am interested in that, and I'm also interested in what the school boards and the committees are doing with our state reps, Representative Coulter, Representative De Macedo, to try and get legislation potentially changed in the State House so that we are not on the hook for these funds and whatnot, because again, it is crushing the tax, the ability for people to remain in Kingston and increase our tax burden. And furthermore, another question along those same lines would be, has the school committee or members of the school committee, Board of Selectmen, anyone else in the town of Kingston that would represent these types of interests, have they talked to other towns or decided to try and work with other towns in terms of presenting a strong united front against the state so that if we do not pay these funds, because we cannot afford to pay these funds, we will not get absolutely annihilated by the state?
Thank you, Mr. Hollow. Does that also address your vocational? Is that under the same?
No.
Okay. So if I can have Superintendent Blackwood come up and address that issue. And then I know that, just for people to understand, I know our Finance Chair, Mary McKinnon, has met with the Tri-Towns. I know that Elaine Fiore from the Board of Selectmen and Chairman Bill Wilson have all met with the regional towns, and they've done a lot of work with going up to the state in regard to this issue. So just for everybody to understand, there's been a lot of activity. But Ms. I just forgot your name, Blackwood. Sorry.
That's okay. Hi, I'm
If
Joy.
you can address that.
Thank you. I'm Joy Blackwood. I'm the superintendent. Thank you for the question. As we spoke a little bit about last night, and I know it was very late, so I apologize. The special education budget is a very volatile area. We are legally obligated to meet the needs of all of our students. What is happening currently in the town of Kingston is we have had a large number of students moving in, and we have also had some students who have changed placements. We are obligated to meet those needs. In terms of trying to control the costs, some of the things that we have done is we recently hired a new special education director. Her name is Marie Grable. One of the main reasons that we are particularly interested in her was she came to us with a background in developing in-house programs. We can educate our students at a much lower cost by keeping them within our buildings. For instance, we developed a new language-based program which is housed right here in Kingston. We were able to keep a large number of students in district at a much lower cost than if we had to send them out to collaboratives. In the special education world, there's basically 3 different areas where our students go to. They go to collaboratives, which are public facilities, and that is a lower cost. If they go into a private day program, that is much more expensive than the public collaboratives. The most expensive costs are our residential programs. Those can cost $250 $250,000 for one child. And there are some children who are in those residential programs. We have teams of teachers, we have teams of professionals who meet with the parents, who develop a program based on those child's needs, and our obligation, again, is to meet those needs. We are well aware of the expenses. We have worked very diligently with the Finance Committee and with the Selectmen. They have been incredibly supportive of us. Again, they have worked with us to help develop in-house programs. We have, over time, been working with different representatives, working with foundation budget communities, trying to establish and to control some of these costs. But again, the reality is these are students that have needs. It is our obligation as a school system and as a community to meet those needs.
Thank you, Ms. Blackwood. Mr. Wilson, you wanted to address what's been going on with up at the state?
Yeah, I guess. I think Superintendent Blackwood addressed the fact of where these expenses came from. I would say we have an obligation to pay the money that we owe. And I don't think it's a good strategy to say that we're going to withhold payment and see what the state does. But that said, in becoming chair of this board and thinking kind of through, okay, you know, what would I see as my priorities or things if I could accomplish one thing or do two things? The two things that came to my mind are that the two biggest driving factors in our budget are education and healthcare. And so there is very little on the local level, quite frankly, that we control and that we can do. We have state mandates, and it's what we have to pay. But I've had a conference call with town council already to talk to him, all the communities that he represents, what other communities have done. I've talked with our town administrator already. I want to meet both with Representative Coulter and Senator DiMacedo and talk about either through the Plymouth County Commission or through the towns that we're already united with under Silver Lake, how we can raise our game to the state level on these two issues. I don't think that there's anything that we can do tonight to lessen our obligations to pay our bills, just like we have to pay them on a personal level. We're foolish if tonight we would vote not to pay for what is owed. But if we do anything in the next year, and what I would like to see done is to have us talk with other communities, get together, explore what's been done. Has anything been successful? Are there any new ideas? How can technology be used to try to lessen the cost of education? And I know that our state representatives will be supportive of that. This is the kind of thing that's going to take time, and it's going to take people. So if you do care, and I know that you do, I hope that you would get involved. I hope that you'd be willing to maybe serve on that kind of committee and be a part of trying to find solutions.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Hallow, does that answer your questions?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Then Mr. Guidaguardi, I know he's on the school committee, but we've got it answered. So if that's okay, thank you. Now, Mr. Hallow, vocational.
Just the question on vocational is there's, as you had pointed out, there's no label as to what the expenses are going to, or?
Okay, so that the vocational one should say expenses. It just is blank.
Okay, that answers that.
Okay, so that one's great. Move on. So now your last is your town net metering. And thank you, Ms. Blackwood. I'm sorry, employee benefits.
Okay, thank you.
Personal services.
With regard to employee services, employee benefit services, since 2014, they have increased approximately 37%. So again, just looking for some clarification on that front for anyone who could provide it.
Ms. McKinnon, can you address the employee benefits, which I'm assuming has a lot to do with health care? That would be line item 910. Our town treasurer, Mr. Stevens.
Ken Stevens, 217 Main Street, Town Treasurer. The reason that you're seeing that price go up is because of all the things that are going on in health insurance. Last night, you heard Representative Coulter talk about, I think, a $700 million hole in the state budget because of things that are going on with health insurance. And Kingston is just a microcosm of what's going on in the state and at the federal level. This year, the town employees, approximately 80% of town employees, are going to see a 16% increase in their premiums. And of course, the town is going to share that 16% increase. Another 10% approximately are going to see an 11% increase, and a lucky few are going to see about a 7% increase. So it's just the reflection of what's happening. And I think that's really the lion's share of what's going up in employee benefits. Pensions are going up. That's our share of the Plymouth County pension liability. But again, the big driver is the health insurance.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Mr. Harlow, does that answer?
I do have a follow-up question.
Certainly.
Thank you very much. With regard to the explanation on health insurance, is there an average cost that that either the finance department has or the treasurer has with regard to what the health insurance cost is per employee in the town?
I think we have the average cost is about just under $10,000 per employee.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's the town
That's what
cost.
the town
Yeah.
cost, the employee pays
Correct.
its own cost.
Yes.
Does that resolve that, Mr. Harlow?
Yes.
Thank you. And then moving on to your non-town net metering.
So with regard to the non-town net metering, I was at a FinCom meeting, and there was a comment that had been made by one of the selectmen to the FinCom to essentially just pick a number on the expense side, I believe it was, as to what to put into that. And so that created a lot of confusion for me. So I guess my question with regard to this is, I see that it's 2.2 million, which is up 200,000 from last year. That's our expense side, but on the revenue side, we obviously have to match that. Are we getting that revenue to match the expenses from the actual production of the windmill, or the windmills, I should say? Because I believe these are the 3 turbines that are not owned by Kingston. Is that correct?
Correct. Okay. Correct.
So are we receiving full match from those windmills? If not, how are we making up the difference in the expenses on our budget? Is it coming from something else? And then lastly, on that same kind of question, well, actually, you know what, I'll let that question be answered first, sorry.
Well, why don't you do your final, just so that it can be wrapped up?
Well, it actually depends on what the response is.
Okay.
So,
Ms.
sorry.
McKinnon, can you address that, please?
Thank you, Mr. Harlow. Just for edification, so everybody understands, on page 61 of your budget book, of your town meeting warrant, it's the budget summary, and so I just want to explain the 2 pieces that are in your budget that Mr. Harlow is asking about. Up under the revenue section, there is a line item called non-town net metering. And for FY18, the budget is $2.2 million, and last year it was $2 million. If you look below in the expenditure section, there is also a line on the departmental grouping called non-town net metering. And you'll see that for the FY18 budget, the revenues match the expenses. And so if for everybody to understand the process that happens, the 3 no fossil fuels turbines that are privately owned and operated, the town has what's called a power purchase agreement with the owner of those turbines, and we act as a pass-through agent. So when the turbines are operating and they're generating electricity and they're producing electricity for the grid, what happens on a monthly basis is that it used to be NSTAR, who is it? Eversource. So Eversource sends revenue to the town of Kingston, And Kingston then deposits that revenue, updates all of our records, our accounting records. And then we negotiated back when this arrangement started, a 1% holdback. That is essentially the town's savings. So we take in the revenue, we withhold 1% of that revenue, and then we remit the rest back to the owner of those turbines. So we act as the pass-through agent for the operation. In addition to the power purchase agreement, we're also collecting taxes from the owner of those turbines. So those two components make up the revenue source. And those all become general fund revenues, the 1% and the taxes. So what happens is, we have to come up with a number to estimate electricity production. We don't know how windy certain days or months are going to be during the year. And we also have to estimate a budget based on the price per kilowatt of the estimated production of electricity. So we work with the general manager, Michael Fournette. I think his title is the general manager. So we work with Michael to come up with those estimates in order to put this budget together. The idea is that it should be the revenues that we take in match the expenses that we pay out, less the 1% that we withhold. Does that answer your question?
Partly, yes. So we're doing it based on estimates. What happens if those estimates do not match? If the revenue estimates do not match what actually comes in?
So if the revenue, whatever comes in for revenue, that's the cap, if you will. So whatever comes in from revenue, we withhold 1% and remit the rest in expenses back to the vendor. So we would never have expenses in excess of the revenue. Does everybody understand that? We're taking money in, we withhold a piece, and we send the rest back to the vendor. So in this situation, we would never have more expenses than the revenue that we're taking in.
Thank you, Ms. McKinnon. Is that?
Just one final question.
Okay, and then move that on.
Yep. So just on a same topic of non-town net metering, my question is this expense or revenue, the 2.2 million, is that being utilized as part of the allowable tax levy limit for the town of Kingston? For example, I believe the tax, the levy limit, once those windmills went online, if I'm reading the budgets correctly, seemed to jump. So I'm just curious if that's being factored in as part of the actual levy limit or not.
Ms. McKinnon?
Okay. So we introduced a new concept called the levy limit. The levy limit is the amount that we raise in taxes to fund the budget, and the amount that we don't raise in taxes comes in as the local receipts that we see presented here. And so what happens is, or what is happening in this particular budget is that the revenues that we are estimating to support this operation are being matched by the expenses that we are authorizing through the approval of this budget. What happens is that we put all of this information together once town meeting adopts a budget and we complete our town meeting process. We then have to remit a lot of paperwork to the state in the fall when the assessors and all of the other financial management professionals in our town put together all of our paperwork and set our tax rate. So what happens is when we set our tax rate, we put in the amount that you are authorizing for appropriation or expenditure, and then we also have to come up with revenues to support that. For FY17 and for FY18, the revenues are being put into the tax recap to match the expenditures for this operation. In prior years, that didn't necessarily happen, so there was some impact on the tax levy in prior years, but for FY17 and for FY18, that is being addressed in the estimated receipts that we capture on the tax recap. Does that answer your question? Or is that
Thank
clear
you,
as
Ms.
mud?
McKinnon.
Okay.
Mr. Hallow, is that answer?
I believe so. So
It's a pass-through.
right, but
Revenue
was it-
comes in, revenue goes out, 1% stays.
But was the tax levy limit allowable in the prior, why are we changing that? If it had been utilized to increase our levy limit past, why don't we continue doing that? So you had just stated that in fiscal 17 and fiscal 18, where it had been utilized in prior years to increase the tax levy limit that was allowable to be utilized to gain taxes from the town, the residents, from their property values. So my question is why is that no longer being utilized in the tax levy limit? Why has it been taken out?
Are you asking why was the net metering taken out of the levy limit?
Yes.
Okay, can you answer that, Ms. McKinnon? Was it ever in and was it ever taken out?
So when this, it's kind of a little complicated, but let me try.
Or was it ever in?
Yes.
And when was it taken out?
FY17.
Okay, tell us why.
I feel like I'm testifying.
Sorry.
Sorry.
We're just trying to, the budget
Okay.
now has been over an hour and 15, 20 minutes. I'm trying to move it along.
Okay, so here's what happens. When we put together a budget, we come up with a set of appropriations that we authorize that we want the town to spend. We need to have revenues that support those expenditures. The calculation of those revenues gets reported on what's called a tax recap sheet, and it gets submitted to the state. What should have been happening since the inception of these turbines is that the revenue that was claimed on the recap sheet should have matched the expenses so that it would have been an exact pass-through. For the first couple of years of the operation of the turbine, that was not the case. Now, we have to remember that this was back when this project was initiated and sort of the Green Community Initiative was sweeping the state of Massachusetts, this was a really new arrangement. And Kingston was the first of its kind in order to set this up and to run it through the general fund. So there were some accounting procedures and record keeping that took place that didn't necessarily match the revenues to the expenditures. So what happened in a couple of prior years is, yes, in fact, some of our tax dollars were used because the revenues were underreported and in order to cover the expenses of that operation. Does that answer the question?
So we were essentially subsidizing
To some degree.
the windmills not on campus?
All right, so if we can, I think it's been answered enough, in all honesty. I think we've gone enough over it in regard to where we are today. So I'd like to move on if that answers. I mean, I don't want to cut you off, Mr. Howell, but
No, I understand.
we're in a.
I just wanted to know
right.
if we were ultimately subsidizing the windmills that weren't on Kingston property. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hollow. Now going back to our other one is Fuller on streets, trees, and parks under expenses. Fuller, if you can stay, there you go.
David Fuller, 233 Country Club Way. My question on this line item is, can someone please tell me what portion of these funds are appropriated to the final coat, top coat of Country Club Way?
You're asking how much of the $283,625 is going to be spent on a top coat on Country Club Way? That's your question?
That is the question.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Basler, who is
Zero.
our superintendent. Are you a superintendent, director, whatever?
Zero is designated for Country Club Way.
Okay, just for clarity for people that don't know, Country Club Way, Indian Pond, has been a development 20 years in the making. It does not have its final top coat. The road is in disrepair. The cost is $1.3 million estimate to pave that road. So I'm wondering, why aren't we appropriating any money in this budget or in future budgets, or are we just going to take the $1.3 million hit?
All right, I
At
think
some
town
time in the
council will
future.
answer that, and if you can do it succinctly.
It's a private road. It's not a town road.
It's a private road. Okay. Do we have expenses to plow that road?
Plowing is a different animal under the statute. In terms of maintenance and plowing are treated very differently. We've made decisions through the Board of Selectmen to continue plowing the road, although there's no
So we
obligation.
plow a road we don't own.
1 second, sir. One person speaks, so you sit there and wait until he finishes. Thank
Right.
you.
The town has made a decision to plow. That doesn't create a continuing liability. The town doesn't have the liability. We've been working through litigation and other means to try and spur the developer and the owner of the roads to complete them. There is pending litigation now to try and go through that. We've had some contractual obligations that we've bound him to, and we're litigating over those right now.
Can you tell us more about the status? Because from what I know, if this litigation doesn't come in the town's favor, the town residents are on the hook for the $1.3 million.
I think what I would recommend, Mr. Fuller, is that you set up an agenda item with the Board of Selectmen for that issue to be discussed, because that's not really right in this regard to this
Well, this
budget.
is part of our budget.
1 minute, Mr. Fuller. So what I'm going to ask is that you set up an agenda with the Board of Selectmen, because it certainly is a more complex issue, and you now want to discuss litigation and other things that really aren't going to be discussed at this town meeting. So I'm just asking that it's probably more properly heard in front of an agenda item in front of the Board of Selectmen.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I have my question answered, though?
What, your question was how much of the budget is being
Zero,
spent on? And the
correct?
answer was zero.
How about our expense for snow removal?
For one road?
For that road?
Mr. Basil, do you have it broken down by roads, or do you
Just
even have
yes
that?
or no.
1 second, Mr. Fuller, you asked a question. Mr.
No, I
Basil,
do
do you
not.
have that?
Snow and ice is under a separate budget. If you look, there's four budgets under the public safety, highway, streets, lights, solid waste, snow and ice.
That's not what he asked. What he
Right.
asked is, what is the cost?
I do not have
Plowing.
that.
Do
That's
we-
what I was- 1 second, Mr. Fuller, please, through the moderator. His question was, so you don't have an answer for this particular road, for the cost of that particular road, or any line item, or any particular, a mile cost X, Y, Z?
No, I do not.
Okay. Mr. Fuller, he doesn't have that answer.
My simple question is, do we, the town taxpayer, pay to plow that road?
And town council answered that and said yes.
Okay. My follow-up question, why is the town paying to plow a private road it does not own?
Okay, town council answered it, but will you answer it again, maybe clearer?
The selectmen have made a public policy decision to not leave the residents without a plowed road. It's not uncommon throughout the Commonwealth for towns to take on the obligation of plowing private roads, so as a service to residents. It's different than maintaining a road. The selectmen have made that decision because of the enormous inconvenience and expense it would cost to the residents that live on the roadway if we chose not to.
So basically, safety concerns.
Okay, thank you. I'll raise my points at another venue.
Okay, thank you. And why don't
Thank
you
you.
just, what you need to do is email our town administrator and request an agenda item on the Board of Selectmen's agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. Point of privilege. Who has that? Mr. Harlow.
Madam Moderator, I just wanted to point out that as I was walking back to my seat, a gentleman called me a dickhead. Now, I wasn't going to say anything about it, and I'm not trying to make a big deal about it. I'm really not. I really wasn't going to say anything. But that being said, people wonder why there are certain people that do not show up to town meetings. I was respectful the entire time. I asked questions that I thought were of concern, not only for myself.
Mr. Harlow, you were correct. You have the right to address any question that you have about the budget. So I would say to everyone, once again, please, people, this is a democratic process. People are asking questions because questions means they don't know the answer to, and the questions have not been frivolous. So thank you, Mr. Harlow, for raising the questions, and thank you for raising the point of privilege.
Thank you.
I find that appalling. Appalling. Moving on now to Council on Aging, Kramer. I couldn't remember if you were a Miss or Mr. Mrs.
Jessica Kramer, 10 Grace Beach Road. I'm just interested in the reason behind the 18.5% increase, particularly in light of the fact that from FY14 to FY15, there was a 19% increase, followed the next year by a 13% increase. So year over year, with the exception of last year, there's been disproportional increases to this particular line item. And the cumulative effect is a 60% increase over what we were paying 4 years ago. So I didn't know the reason behind this, and I also wondered if this particular trend is projected to continue in any way.
Thank you, Ms. Kramer. I'm going to ask, I believe our director is right behind you. So if you can address that, please.
I'm a little short. Tammy Murray, Director of Elder Affairs. I'm also a resident, 11 School Street. Basically, I think what would answer your question is $98,000 is reimbursed to the general fund from our GATRA drivers. When I started in 2014, we were only requesting 60,000, so there's an increase right there. We also have added a per diem driver, which is going to be covered by GATRA, as well as the assistant director, which was approved in the fall. So I do not expect to be adding any staffing, and I would like to say that I've added a lot of services with the staffing that we do have already, so I don't plan on this going up.
Thank you, Ms. Murray. Ms. Kramer, does that answer your question?
I just want to follow up with, has the amount of people being served by the programs increased? Has there been any change in the number?
Can you two make sure you come to the microphone? Other people have to hear you.
Sorry. I was wondering about the amount of people being served by the programs, if that's been increased. So.
Ms. Murray, can you answer whether or not you've had an increase in your elders?
Yes, we've quadrupled, I'd like to say. I know in outreach alone, we've gone up 600%.
I guess that healthcare is really working well, huh? Sorry. Ms. Kramer, does that answer your questions?
It does.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we've resolved that issue. Moving on, we have Mr. Lofstrom on employee benefits, personal services.
Dave Lobstrom, 71 Ocean Hill Drive. I think the treasurer partially answered a question that I had on the benefits, but I'm just going to restate that in the full year 2014 on page 66, we spent $4 million on employee benefits. That's gone up to $5.5 million in this new proposed budget. That's a 37% increase, as Mr. Harlow had referenced. It's also 12% of our overall budget. So I heard from the treasurer, I guess, that rate was part of the explanation for that increase. But I also was curious to know, has there been an increase in our head count or in the experience of the pool of folks that would also be driving this? Because I don't believe that, just based on my experience, my professional experience, that rates necessarily equate to a 38% increase over a couple of years. So I wanted to see if there was any other drivers.
Thank you, Mr.
to the increase.
Lofstrom. Mr. Stevens, our treasurer, can you address, and I think one of the issues that addressed on this that was raised is that the group, what was it, Mayflower Group had held on no raises for a number of years and then they made it up? If you can address that with the town.
We've been adding for the past 4 or 5 years, we've been adding about 10 new subscribers a year.
10, is that right?
About 10. It seems to be about 10. We went for 3 years. Mayflower held the line, and we had no premium increases. So arguably, maybe we should have had some increases. The group spent down some of their reserves in order to, prevent those premium increases. And so we've spent a couple of years making up for that. To get the reserves of the group back to where they need to be. We had some bad experience last year. One of the plans was proposed to be eliminated. At the last minute, the advisory group that actually runs the Mayflower Health Group voted to keep that plan, and so we've had a major adjustment in the premiums.
Okay. And just maybe a
Thank
point
you,
of
Mr.
clarity.
Lofstrom. Another question?
A follow-up to the same is that I'm just looking across the line here in the book provided, and it's not showing the line's been held. It's showing that there's been a several $100,000 increase year over year. So I just, maybe I'm not understanding, I think, that where they held the line, where the carriers held the line on that.
They held the line on the premiums, but we were getting new subscribers.
Okay, so that was
yeah,
it
was not going to stay the same with new subscribers coming on board.
Has the town ever looked at getting an alternative plan in the last, say, number of years here throughout this 37% increase? Like a different carrier, or if they put out an RFP for those services, or for another broker, per se?
The town has not done that. I think Mayflower has done an excellent job of providing for the communities that it services, And looking around at the GIC and some of the other plans, we don't see that they're any better off. In fact, some of them are worse off.
Okay.
So
Thank you for-
your answer has been that you've looked at it in regard to GICs and others. Mayflower is a group that's provided. Do you want to? Oh.
Bob can clarify that in fact he has that.
Okay, Mr. Lofstrom, town administrator can address some of the views, like we've said, about looking at GIC and all that. So,
So
Mr. One second, Mr. Fennessy. And then, I'm sorry, did you have another question that you wanted?
Let's see what Mr. Fennessy has.
Okay, Mr. Fennessy's going to talk about your last question, which is, have they checked into other areas or other providers or other services?
Routinely look at other providers and other groups even to see if Mayflower is the best group that we can be in. Because obviously, the bigger the group, the liability is spread over many people instead of just in your town. So, and across the board, Mayflower is still the best deal that we can get. Doesn't mean that at some point, we may go out to bid and see if there's something else better. But right now, in looking at all these other plans, it's still the best deal we can get.
Okay, and that's, thank you for that, because that's ultimately where I was going is that I think that these are the type of services, especially in this environment where taxes are going up, that could be put out to bid and competitively looked at, and I just would suggest that this is something that we do that in the future with. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Lofstrom. All set, we're done? I think we're done.
We're done.
So there being no further holds on the table, at this time, what I'm going to do now is we're going to be moving Article 24, the budget, without any amendments. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Motion carries. So now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a very brief reset at 9:07. We have a motion to reconsider before our break. That being seconded, again, ladies and gentlemen, the question would be is if you want to reconsider, meaning open up debate and continue to talk about the budget longer, then you would vote yes. If you're done and you want it to close out, you're going to say no. So all those in favor of motion to reconsider, say aye. All those opposed? No. Motion does not carry unanimously. So we're going to take a very brief recess at this time, and as I indicated, it's 9:08. And we're going to take a recess. Please stay. Please stay. We have a lot of business to cover. And again, I remind everybody to recycle. We need the, it looks like we're going to go into night number 3. $10:30, no, window. I'm the one that's the night owl, so. But anyhow, so we're going to close a little bit earlier, and then it does look like we're definitely going to our 3rd night. Our hopes of 2 nights is gone. So now, moving on, our first article is Article 25. Mr. Harlow.
Article 25, petitioned article, public voting by secret ballot. Move that all votes by the public be executed via a secret ballot at public voting stations.
Do I have a second? Hearing a second on that, Mr. Harlow, would you like to address your motion?
Yeah, so the intent of this is that over the past several years while attending the town meeting, many people have approached me and said that they're concerned about speaking up, and they feel intimidated, and lots of times they won't vote a certain way or at all because of their fear of being intimidated and or treated in an inappropriate fashion as a result of their vote. That being said, I first drafted this article, and it was brought to our attention via the selectmen that the article was not written in the form of a bylaw, so it's just, it wouldn't take effect as a bylaw. So as a result, I listened to what the selectmen had to say along with town council, Attorney Tallerman, and I rewrote the article, and it was
signed by 10 or more registered voters in the town of Kingston and was submitted by myself to the town clerk in a timely fashion. And I personally believe that the rewritten article should appear on the town meeting warrant. However, the selectmen chose to remove it. I contacted the Attorney General's office, and they
Mr.
said...
Hallow, you're going beyond the scope of
Okay,
this
so
article.
I'll make a motion, ma'am.
You made it, yeah.
Okay. So,
And you've just addressed it. Do you have anything further about the means of a secret ballot?
yes, I believe we should be voting via secret ballot, and I also believe that it would increase public participation as well if we were to vote on town meeting agenda items as we do with regard to electing our officials. So I'd like to make a motion, if I may.
You have. Thank you, Mr. Hallow. I have Mr. Attorney Talaman, can you please address how this is going to be considered as a resolution and not as a bylaw?
Right, so as Mr. Harlow indicated, this is not binding. It is, because it's not written in the form of a bylaw, it is really just a policy directive or a resolution of a expressed interest of the town, but if passed, it wouldn't be binding upon the town or any particular body or this town meeting.
I'd like to move it to make it a bylaw as written.
You can't do that, because what happens is once the article is submitted and the article goes to a warrant, you can only do something that's lesser included, and making something that would be considered a resolution into a binding bylaw, is beyond the scope of the article. And so what happens is that the article can't go beyond what the public was given notice of. So you'd have to file next year, or for the fall, I guess I'm now hearing there's gonna be a fall one, that you'd have to file one to do a bylaw change for balloting by secret ballot.
Okay, again, to the public, I believe this should be as a bylaw. I'd just like to read what I wrote to the, and was submitted in a timely manner and by 10 or more of the registered voters
But
in
Mr.
Kingston.
Hallow, that's not what's before the, that's not part of the warrant article now. So
Okay.
that's got to be a separate issue that you can raise with the Board of Selectmen, because they controlled the warrant until it was posted, and then it becomes my warrant. And under my warrant, this article wasn't on the warrant, so it can't be addressed at town meeting. What I would like to do, though, is I'd like to hear from, and then I'll come back to you, Mr. Howard. I'd like to hear from Mr. Wilson, but I'd also like to hear from Ms. Fiore about work that she and I have done in regard to electronic voting as well. So, Chairman Wilson, if you want to address first, and then Mr. Hallow, I will come back to you. I just want you to understand there's other things going on.
So whether it's a resolution or it would be binding, obviously, if a will of the people is expressed, that would be taken into consideration, and then obviously it could be made into a motion at a subsequent town meeting. That said, this is something the selectmen have decided to hear the arguments for petitioned articles before we take a vote as a board, if we take a vote at all. So I'm expressing my opinion for myself and not speaking, and the other selectmen, if they want to speak, can do so. I am opposed to this, principally because if we had to take every one of these votes that we took last night, tonight, subsequent nights as a secret ballot, the amount of time, the cost, the radical change to the public process would be something that I would see as being very, very negative. I've talked to town council about how this would even work, the structure of it. It would be dramatically expensive for us to do. Think about just the delays in doing a voice vote versus a card vote. I also do think that we strive, and it's not a perfect process, but we do strive for civility in this room. And as we just heard, if there is a breach of that, it's condemned. And I hope that we all continue to condemn anyone who would, speak ill of somebody who's voicing their opinion. So if that said, saying yea or nay in a public forum or holding your card, I hope that no one feels intimidated in that process, and I think that what would go into having every single vote in this town have to be by secret ballot that would then be voted, counted, while we're still waiting to see whether or not we have our majority or our 2/3. And then it could be reconsidered, as you know how the public process works. And then there could be another round of the secret ballot. We could have weeks and weeks and weeks long town meetings.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I have Ms. Fiore. If you can address the issue on the electronic voting that we discussed as the town meeting committee. There is an actual town meeting committee regarding some of that we've investigated the costs and some of the new information that's come up. Thank you.
As Gina said, we did look into electronic handheld counters that would produce a report and all of that much quicker. Everybody would get a handheld device. Years ago, it was extremely expensive. We didn't pursue it any further. Just recently, I notified Janet that there's a town on the South Shore that is doing it for a more reasonable cost. We're going to look into that town, talk with them, possibly see if they'll rent their equipment to us with their personnel. So we understand the need to, one, make things quicker, and if anybody is intimidated, take that away. So we are looking at modern technology to try to help that, and hopefully we'll maybe make some progress by the next town meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Fiore. What I will say is, just to add it on in regard to the cost, we were originally, when it was run through the mass moderators, it was going to be about $10,000 per meeting. So that was a little exorbitant for our town. I know Duxbury has it, by the way, but not to say that. But what they're actually looking at now is that potentially the cost on purchasing could come down to somewhere around $4,000. But the problem that we've seen with some of these, and they're new, is that they can become outdated, and then the problem is the tallying and things run out in the sense of how technology happens. What it would be is you'd all have a little handheld. I went and saw it happen. I'll have a little handheld. You can vote yes or no, and then the tally comes up to me as the moderator, and we have that count. So that's how it would work in that system. But now that the cost has come down somewhat, we'll be looking at that again under the town meeting committee. So just as an FYI, and Mr. Hollow, I'm not sure that you were aware of that, is something that everybody's been looking at. So moving on, Mr. Fonts. I'm sorry, I had Mr. Keating, then Mr. Fonts, and then I'll go back to Mr. Hollow.
Jeffrey Keating for Gristmill, and I just want to say that I think this article has some merit, and there are certainly alternatives that are not expensive. And in my business, we have conferences where anyone can take their mobile device. There's an application which my company rents, a very cheap software, and you can vote directly from your iPhones or any kind of smartphone or tablet. So there are alternatives, and I could even give you the name of the vendor that my company uses for that service, and I think it's very effective. I've seen the intimidation myself here, and I've seen individuals with vandalism to their vehicles, tires being popped just by voicing their opinion. I think it will definitely increase participation and prevent any further intimidation.
Thank you, Mr. Keating. Mr. Fonts?
I would just like to say, I would like to encourage our officials to look into all the different options, even possibly instead of renting, if perhaps we could purchase the equipment, but along with other towns and have some sort of system set up where we can share with those towns. Oh, that was mentioned? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. It's a lot to take in.
No, I didn't mean it that way. I just meant, yes, that's one of our things, is to rent it from the local town.
Okay, great.
So that's a possibility.
Well, I was saying like buy it together as opposed to rent it from another town.
Well, yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
Russ Boydlow, 14 Wharf Lane.
I'm sorry, could you repeat your name again?
Yeah, Russ Boydlow. Last night we spoke about having more participation in meetings, town meetings like this. I think that if you thought about having the things that we talk about, the amendments that we talk about, done in a general election for the town, where we either do it during a selectman's election or town officials election, you could have meetings like this where people are informed of what's going on. As we've already seen, we've just spent quite a while trying to get some education on what the money is spent for. Where do our tax dollars go? And so if you had an informative meeting where the explanation of the budget was done, then you put it out to vote, you would have the whole town or the people that would come, because more people come to vote than they come to this meeting. And so instead of just having 150 people steering what's going on in town, you'd have a bigger majority of people doing it. So I think that we should think out of the box on how this is done. And I agree with the petition that people get intimidated and won't come to the microphone or speak their mind because they're concerned or they're just stage, they're stage struck. They don't want to stand up in front of a group of people. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Just so you know, that's actually called an Australian ballot. And, sir, what we're talking about, that's actually an Australian ballot, and it has been discussed by the town government study committee. So, sir?
Bradford Randall, 39 Winter Street. I'd be diametrically opposed to this. As Selectman Wilson said, just the time required in processing secret ballots could be very consuming. Also, with anything electronic, you have to be worried about security. It's pretty impossible to hack a card vote. That, and I'd also want you to think about the fact that, last night someone said, if it's not broke, don't fix it. It may, prevent intimidation, if that's what we're worried about. But I would also say a secret ballot will allow people to hide, and it will allow hypocrisy. And I like being able to see how people vote on things. That's important to me, so I can know if someone's telling me the truth when they say something to me in person, and then they vote a certain way at town meeting. I would just want you to think about that.
Thank you, Mr. Randall. Mr. Hallow, I was going to end with you, so you have the final say. If you want, you don't have to.
Yeah, nothing more. I think Mr. Boydlow touched on it. Again, we could have a informative town meeting, and then all the articles then be placed on a ballot that we can then do at another date in a similar fashion as a election of government officials. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hallow. Moving on, now moving Article 25. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? No. Motion does not carry. Thank you, everybody, for your input. Moving on to Article 26, transfer to other post-employment benefits, health insurance liability fund, our famous OPEB. Mr. Pike.
Motion, move that the town appropriate and transfer the sum of $100,000 from free cash to the other post-employment benefits health insurance liability trust fund account.
Thank you. Do I have a second? That being seconded, ladies and gentlemen, Board of Selectmen voted favorable 5-0-0. Finance Committee voted favorable 3-2-0. Mr. Pike.
The OPEB fund is the town's trust fund that we've established to pay for the cost of future health insurance and life insurance benefits for our retired employees. This covers both town and school non-teacher employees. This does not include the Silver Lake employees, nor the water nor sewer department employees. As with all other communities across the state, this is our single largest unfunded liability for future costs. The town's most recent actuarial valuation indicated that our unfunded liability stands at $40 million. To date, we have contributed $150,000 to this fund, $50,000 in fiscal year 15, nothing in fiscal year 16, and $100,000 last year. Questions?
I'll do that, Mr. Pike. It was nice, though. Mrs. Hollow.
Dorothy Pat Hollow, 3 Pebble Lane, Kingston, Massachusetts. Could you please explain why FinCom voted 3-2-0?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Pike?
Three of the members voted for the full $100,000. 2 of us voted against it because we preferred to go with $50,000, which we thought was more affordable under this year. The other 3 people felt that $100,000 was probably not enough, that, sometime down the road, the town is going to be faced with this issue of, a $40 million liability. It'll be something that'll probably be taken care of over 50 years or more. So, that was basically, my feeling that I was in favor of only 50,000 at this time.
Mr. Pike, did you, you
you.
indicated that 3 of the votes were for 400,000? I'm assuming you meant 3 of the votes were for 100,000.
100,000 each, yes.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hallow, that's good? Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Seeing no further debate, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? No. Motion carries. Moving on to Article 27, motion to transfer to stabilization fund. Mr. Pike.
Move that the town appropriate and transfer the sum of $100,000 from free cash to the stabilization fund account.
I have a second. Receiving a second on that, Board of Selectmen voted favorable, 500. Finance Committee voted favorable, 500. Mr. Pike?
The stabilization fund is really our town savings account, sometimes known as a rainy day fund. We currently have a balance in there of about $2.2 million. We have a target. The Finance Committee a few years ago got together and we determined that a reasonable target would be 7% of our annual budget, which in today's dollars equates to about $2.6 million. So we're recommending adding another 100,000 to get us to the 2.3 million or so. And then, in future years, should get to the point where we don't need to, try to fund any more. And this is considered a reserve account that we would use only in the worst case emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Pike. Any further debate? Mr. Font, you're getting up?
I guess it's more just like a comment. I guess my position is that I'm all for saving money. My concern is, we start putting money into the savings account, it gets larger and larger and larger, and then at some point along the road, we're faced with someone who wants to spend this money on something, and we're going to vote on it, and who knows what that money is going to be spent on. So I guess for me, just my personal position is that I probably would have liked to see a bigger number getting paid towards our debt and maybe a little bit less being saved, because I don't have confidence that the money that we save will necessarily be spent wisely in the future. So that's just my position.
Thank you, Mr. Font. I will just remind you that it takes a 2/3 vote to get it out of stabilization.
I'm still scared.
Okay.
Thanks.
Mr. Guidoboni?
Hi, Mark Guidoboni, 15 Old Orchard Lane, Silver Lake School Committee. And I just want to ask, we don't have necessarily a town fund set up for our special education, and our special education fluctuates substantially throughout the years. And we're going to be voting on several stabilization funds here in town meeting, and I was just wondering if the Finance Committee could address why we don't have a stabilization fund for our special ed. And I just want to briefly say that our special education comes out of our Kingston Elementary School budget, even though it takes care of youth all the way up to 24. In that process, the students suffer without having the overall school budget suffers annually. So my question is this the, I guess, the spot that you take your special ed budget out of in the event that you don't have sufficient funds year to year?
Okay, so you have 2 questions. Why don't we have a special ed stabilization? And the second is, can you take special ed money for emergencies out of this account? So I'm going to have town council answer the special ed. You answer the second one. Town council answer the question on special ed, which would be the school committee would have to do that, right?
Well, I can't recall off the top of my head. There is a different kind of stabilization account that regional schools can utilize. I don't recall if you have employed one. It would need approval by this town meeting that you could set up your own stabilization fund account. I don't recall one. Other towns do it. And it is a relatively new feature of municipal finance, so you may want to look at that if you haven't employed one already. If you have, you may want to think about funding that for some of those purposes, and then I'll let Ms. McKinnon comment on whether or not she would recommend the use of municipal or one-time funds for operating costs like that.
I wanted just that out there. That's a little beyond the scope of the article, but I wanted that question answered. Ms. McKinnon, if you can answer the question limited to, can you take funds from the stabilization fund to fund an unfunded special ed?
Yeah.
The answer to that question is yes, you can. That's the purpose. A stabilization fund is intended to be used to offset the tax rate in extraordinary circumstances. It does require a 2/3 vote. So it would be, if you think about, for example, the town of Munson, who had a hurricane last year, and their town hall was decimated. That kind of a thing, that kind of an extraordinary circumstance is a perfect use of the stabilization fund, so you'd hold a town meeting to move that money out of the stabilization fund in order to be used. Could it be used to fund something in our budget? It could, but we would have to look at that very closely and make sure that we are not funding ongoing operating expenses with one-time reserves, because a stabilization fund is considered a one-time reserve. In terms of your first question about special ed.
Well, I don't really want to go there. Council answered it, so I want to be cautious on going too far beyond the scope of the article.
Okay.
Just for time. Thank you.
Does that answer it?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Guidoboni. Sir?
Russ Boydell, 14 Wharf Lane. Just a point of clarification. It seems that we're taking money from free cash is being transferred. Is there a big balance in free cash? Where's the free cash? I mean, we can only take so much cash from some place and put it to another.
Then the question is, you want the Finance Committee to identify what is free cash?
Well, in other words, is there a balance of free cash that we're dealing with? And if we take these funds at some point down the line here, on all these articles, we keep taking cash, there's got to be a zero balance in where we're getting the money.
Mr. Pike, can you address that?
We have free cash come up every year from basically what pieces of budgets were unexpended from the prior year. So this year, we started with a free cash balance of over $2 million. We've utilized over $1 million of it, including $500,000 that we talked about last night for the special ed, one-time issue. And so we still have a balance of somewhere around $800,000, I believe, a little over $800,000 that we intend to carry forward into next year.
So in other words, of all these articles that we're transferring free cash, we have funds to cover it.
That's correct, and we will have a balance of about $800,000.
Cool. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boudelian. Do you say that Boudelian? Boydlow. Boydlow. Okay. Boydlow. Thank you. Seeing no further debate, all those in favor of Article 27, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to Article 28, which is transfer to stabilization fund for capital projects. My understanding is no motion. Is that correct? No motion. Moving on to Article 29, transfer meal tax surplus revenue to stabilization fund for capital planning on capital projects. Mr. Pike. Ms. McKinnon.
Move that the sum of $280,947 be transferred from free cash to the stabilization fund for capital projects account, said sum being equivalent to the amount of funds generated by the meal tax.
Having a second on that, I have Board of Selectmen favorable action 500, Finance Committee favorable action 600. Ms. McKinnon.
This is an annual transfer that has taken place since the town of Kingston adopted the meals tax a couple of years ago. And when we did adopt the meals tax, we as a collective group had decided that we would reinvest this revenue stream back into the community in order to invest in our capital assets. So what this is doing is funding our capital stabilization program to make sure that the Capital Planning Committee has some funding available to address those needs on an annual basis.
Thank you, Ms. McKinnon. Seeing no further debate, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Moving on to Article 30, Chapter 90 funds. Ms. Mumford.
Move that the town accept and expend so-called Chapter 90 funds available for fiscal year 2018.
Having a second on that, that would be Board of Selectmen favorable 500, Finance Committee favorable 700. Ms. Mumford?
This is the annual article to appropriate the funds received from the state under Chapter 90 of the Massachusetts General Laws to be used for infrastructure improvements and repairs.
Thank you. Seeing no debate on that, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Moving on to Article 31. Article 31 is our capital equipment project funding. Article 31, Mr. Rizzio. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Good evening. Move that the sum of $394,765 be appropriated for the following capital expenditures, and to meet this appropriation, the sum of $280,947 be transferred from the Capital Project Stabilization Fund, $113,818 be transferred from the free cash. Said expenditures to be under the direction of the departments named below. $500,000, or correction, $50,000 for the purpose of purchasing one patrol car for the police department, $11,000 for the purpose of purchasing 10 sets of active shooter ballistic gear, police department, $13,800 for the purpose of purchasing 6 automated external defibrillators, police department, $17,500 for the insulation project for the Council on Aging facilities, $16,000 for the installation of safety guardrails at Opatinsky, Captain Bailey, Grays Beach, and the basketball court facilities.
There's no hold, this is a motion. That's okay. So go back where you were.
Correct, and that was for facilities. $20,000 for 4 voting machine tabulators, town clerk. $30,000 for the purpose of refurbishing a 2003 pump engine, fire department. $132,465 to pay for the first full year of a 3-year lease for the 2 ambulances approved and purchased last year under lease to own, fire department. $32,000 to replace 4 garage doors at the Pembroke Street Fire Station, fire department. $72,000 to purchase 645 HD-D compactor to replace the existing arm system that pushes trash into the trailers, solid waste.
Do I have a second? That being seconded, I had Board of Selectmen pending vote. Do you have a vote? Mr. Wilson? Well, you're doing that, Finance Board of Selectmen is favorable, 500. Finance Committee is favorable, 500. So, Mr. Rizzio, if you want to address that article. Motion.
A lot of hard work by the committee. I do want to thank those who participated with the committee and helped out this year. We had over $1 million worth of requests this year. We were already committed to the ambulance lease, which of the amount that we are requesting is almost a third of the amount. So we had a very small amount to work with a lot of requests from the departments. We thought very carefully about it, and the decisions we made to purchase the items we did, we tried to do the best things for the town that we could with the funds available.
Thank you, Mr. Rizzio. I believe we had a hold. Was that you, Mr. Hollow? So if you do that, and then I'll come over to, I think that's Ms. Romano, I can't see.
Cortland Harrell, 31 Howlands Lane. I make a motion to remove item 5, $16,000 for installation of safety guardrails at Opatinsky, Captain Bailey, Grays Beach, and basketball courts.
Okay. So we have on the table a motion to remove item number 5, $16,000 under facilities. Do I have a second on that motion? So we're going to take that as a motion to amend to remove. Second, Mr. Hollow, if you can come down and write us a motion. Do you have any more paper? Do you want me to give him one? I got one right here. Okay. And you know how to, you know what to do on that. Just right. Thank you. Oh, I only have red. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Rizzio. My pens are running out. Okay. Who's in the back? No. Officer, if you don't mind, would you grab Diane, please, from out front, our assistant town clerk, and tell her that we need her up on the podium? Thank you so much. Okay, so we've got that motion, we've got a second. We're going to have debate now on the motion first before, so if you guys want to address, thank you. If you guys want to address the motion to amend to remove the $16,000, item number 5, that's what we're now debating. Do you want to address it first, Mr. Hollow? Say why you want it?
I believe it's unnecessary, and I believe that that could be money well spent or saved or returned to the taxpayers in one form or another. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hollow. Mr. Rizzio, would you like to address that?
Yes, and also would like to offer the opportunity for facilities directly to address if they'd like to, but the discussion and the request was actually for safety. The intent is that these rails are to prevent vehicles from being able to go on to these playgrounds, basketball courts, and other areas. There have been incidents that's happened. The request from facilities had been to put these up in a way to prevent vehicles that readily can access those areas right now, to prevent them from being able to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Rizzio. Anyone else want to address the motion to amend? 1 minute, Mr. Hollow. Let's get, Mr. Norman, did you want to address that?
Yes.
This is our facilities director.
Bradford Norman, 38 Summer Street, and I'm the facilities manager. Basically, every night in the news, every week in the news, you'll see that someone is backing up, and while backing up, they step on the gas pedal, and the car goes forward. You see them go into pizza parlors, they go in every sort of area and hit things, hit people, kill people. These areas that are listed to put up these safety guardrails are specific areas that are vulnerable to that happening. There are parking spaces right outside these areas, so if someone comes up, there's people playing on the basketball court, then this happens, they step on the gas and they think they're going in reverse, they go forward, they will take out everyone on the basketball court. These are for safety, and safety is a big issue.
Thank you, Mr. Norman. Mr. Fonce, if you're in line, can you come down just so you're not right in front of the doorway? This is that whole fire thing. Sure. Thank you so much. Anybody else want to address? We're back to Mr. Hollow.
I'd just like to make a Cortland Hollow, 31 Howlands Lane. I attended a Grays Beach Park meeting with regard to the, I guess, redevelopment of the Grays Beach, and neighbors in the vicinity brought up the fact that there's a tremendous amount of drug activity that goes on at Grays Beach. And I myself, to be honest, don't even go over to Grays Beach anymore because I've been over there several times and I've seen hypodermic needles and syringes on the ground. And in addition to that, I've seen, I guess you can say, squatters living on the premises. And when it's brought up, why aren't these gates locked at night for public safety, the rec department, I believe it was the chair, said, ask for it in the budget, there's not enough funds. So again, I just think that this is personally ridiculous that we're going to be putting up guardrails. I played on these fields or basketball courts as a child and through my teen years. And again, anything is possible with regard to safety. But again, we could all live in bubbles and drive tanks to increase safety. But I think it's not a reasonable thing to do. And my thing is, how about we start addressing issues that citizens bring up concerning public safety, as simple as locking the gate at night. And it was even finally said, why don't you lock the gate at night, to one of the citizens that brought up their concerns with the drug drug
Well, that's
trafficking
kind of
and all
going beyond
there.
the scope of this one, because this is for safety rails, not for the gate. But
But
I would recommend...
but again, it's like, why don't we address something that we know as opposed to a possibility? That's what I have an issue with. Thank you.
And you should address that with the chief of police as well, in regard to the safety concerns down there. Any further on the motion to amend? Yes, ma'am.
Jessica Kramer, 10 Grays Beach Road. I just wanted to respond to that to say that I think that I haven't seen the same type of safety concerns that you are suggesting, and I live right on the beach, and I think that part of the reason that the gate is opened is that the police go in there constantly throughout the night and patrol the area, and they wouldn't have the same type of access if the gate was closed. And I just wanted to say that I think that the police are doing a good job of keeping that area safe and clean, so.
Thank you. Any further on the motion to amend?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Fonce?
John Michael Fonce, 16 May Avenue. I actually would like to echo Mr. Harlow's concerns. I go down to Grays Beach Park quite frequently. with my child, and I do see that as a safety concern. And again, I understand that this is close to out of what we're talking about, but I think the bigger issue is we're talking about spending money on guardrails to promote safety for something that could happen. And I'm not saying it won't. I mean, obviously, these things happen. However, we have a safety concern in town that is happening that's not being welcomed in terms of finding a solution. So I would be against spending the money on this and perhaps looking at addressing the concern of the member of the Rec Commission who said that it wasn't in the budget to have someone go down and lock the gate. And again, I appreciate the opinions in terms of whether or not even locking the gate is a good idea. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's something that needs to be addressed as well. But I think that to spend money on guardrails for something that could happen, I believe that it might be a little bit just preemptive. I mean, are we going to put, guardrails along all the sidewalks because people drive drunk and drive off the road and hit someone walking on the sidewalk? I think, again, safety is extremely, extremely important. I have 2 children that I plan on raising in Kingston, and I want them to be safe as well. But at the same time, I don't want safety to just overrun everything and drive the budget into the ground and break the taxpayer. So I think we just need to we need to care, we need to have our emotions and care about keeping people safe, but we can't let our emotions just run wild when we're voting. As Ms. McKinnon said at the beginning when she opened up, we have to think logically when we vote. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fonce. Are you on the motion to amend?
I am. Susan Woodworth, 136 Grove Street, and also the Recreation Director for the Town of Kingston for the past 18 years. I understand the concern for safety. There are also some guidelines that the town should be aware of and that we do need to be responsive of. Different guidelines change for different playground facilities or basketball courts, areas where the public is actually at. So some of these guidelines, as far as the guardrails and things like that, are actually some standardizations that have changed over the years and that we need to do our due diligence. I actually spoke with Attorney Talleyrand about this, and some of these guidelines are recommendations, but at the same time, they're recommendations that are made through the United States, and so different activities that need to take place through the town, and this is one of those particular things that has changed since 2011. So we need to do our due diligence, we need to follow the protocol, we need to keep our children safe, and it's is what Brad Norman said, we need to keep our children safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Woodworth. Mr. Fonce, I think you were pretty clear on.
I just wanted a quick clarification.
One
on what
quick
was
and
just
that's
said.
it, and then we're moving on.
The new guidelines, are they for new parks being built, or are they for pre-existing structures? In other words, are things that already exist, are they grandfathered the way they are, or are they obligated to be updated to the new standards? Thank you. I just want that clarified.
Miss, do you want to clarify that one? No, I just. All right, well then I want that clarified. Ms. Woodworth, quickly. Is it only applicable to new parks, or is it applicable to all existing town parks?
It is applicable to all existing facilities.
Okay, so applicable to all existing.
Correct.
Thank you. Mr. Atanian, you want to address this article?
The amendment.
In regard to the motion to amend for the 16,000?
Yes.
Okay.
I'd like to point out that the 2 of these items, the purpose and refurbishing of the pump engine.
No. We're on the motion to amend regarding the 16,000 for the Grays Beach, for the safety guardrails. That's the only one we're addressing right now.
I just want to make the point that if some accident would occur, it might not concern just one victim, but a number of victims. So I would like to just see if you could keep that in mind as you think through this.
Thank you, Mr. Atanian. You can get up later on the other one. Seeing no further debate, I'm going to ask on a motion to amend. This is to remove the $16,000 for the safety guardrails. Item number 5, the motion to amend would remove it. So all those in favor of the motion to amend, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Motion does not carry. Motion to amend does not carry. And now moving on to, Mr. Atanian, I think you had others, and then I'll go back out to the microphones. You don't want to speak again? Okay. Yes.
Jean Coleman, 20 Howlands Lane. I just first want to say thank you to the police department for adding the defibrillators to their budget. I know that this has been something that has been requested several times now, and unfortunately Kingston just has not had the funds to do it. What I do not see is any cost of training for the officers, and I just want to make sure that that is not something that's being overlooked, and that we're going to be providing these defibrillators without the proper cost of training the officers so that they can be put to use immediately.
That, I'm not sure whether or not, Mr. Rizzio, can you address that, or should I have the chief get up
If the chief
regarding
would
to
like
that?
to speak.
Okay. Thank you, chief.
There'll be no additional costs. The officers are trained every year in their in-service training. In fact, they just went through a secondary refresher class with Captain Curry of the fire department. So they've actually had 2 training sessions this year. So there'll be no additional costs on training.
Thank you for answering that question. Moving on, sir.
Russ Boydler, 14 Wharf Lane. I'd just like some clarification on point 1, $50,000 for the purpose of purchasing 1 patrol car. Is there a particular time when these patrol cars have reached the end of their serviceability so that we have to purchase a new one? Is this addition to the existing fleet? And also, secondly, on the doors, $32,000 to replace 4 garage doors on Pembroke Street Fire Station. My question is, when we go and find out what the cost is on the replacement of these doors, how is that done? Is it put out to bid, or do we just have one company that's been used for years and we just go along with what they tell us?
Mr. Rizzio, can you address item number 1 first?
Yes.
And make sure that that's satisfactory, and then move on to item number 9.
So this is actually replacing a Ford Crown Victoria. We're pure fleeting all now with the Ford Interceptors. So this is replacing an older vehicle that is going out of service. This isn't an additional vehicle to add in.
So,
all right, back to you.
Also subsequently, in other words, this vehicle no longer is a serviceability vehicle for our police department, so therefore we want to replace it. It's worn out.
Correct, and they actually requested 3. We were only able to fund 1.
Okay, thank you.
On the second item, on the garage doors, so yes, it was placed out to bid. There's a long story behind this, but it comes to the fact that the type of door that was originally installed wasn't ideal for the situation. It was a residential style door, not a commercial door. This fund is actually going to go ahead and put the proper door in correctly, all 4, so that we do not have a lot of the problems that the fire department has been experiencing. They're coming close to catastrophic failure in some of the doors.
Great.
So that's the intent, but yeah, it is going out to bid.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I'm going to, Mr. Gallagher, are you queued, Mr. Gallagher? And then I'll go back to you, and then then the other mic.
Paul Gallagher, 8 Longview Drive. I'd like to start by asking the Finance Committee to forgive me for this, but I'd like to make a motion to amend line number 6, Town Clerk, from $20,000 to $30,000 to purchase 5 tabulators for a total of $404,765.
What was the number again?
From $20,000 to $30,000, making the total $404,765.
What was the second part of that, 404,000?
For the 765.
765, with the
Yes.
additional 10,000, is
That
that
is-
coming from free cash?
Yes, from free cash, please.
And then I'll need you to put that in writing.
Okay.
So I have a second on that. Mr. Gallagher, would you like to address that motion?
I'll try to make
amend?
it quick. We are running on antiquated tabulators in our voting process. We have 4 that are very aged. Although they're in better equipment than most in the state, they're no longer going to be making parts to replace for them, so the service is going to be coming to an end sometime in the next several years. Most towns, if not the majority of towns, have already gone and replaced their tabulators. It's time for us to do so as well. I mentioned this to the Capital Plan Committee 2 years ago to get them prepared for it. I put in a request for approximately $30,000 to purchase 5 tabulators. Although we're currently functioning with 4, We have had an increase in population from 11,000 to 13,000 odd since I became the town clerk. We've increased from 8,000 odd to over 9,000, close to 10,000 voters, registered voters in town. And our precincts are actually starting to become swayed. Precinct 3 actually has 500 more voters in it than Precinct 1, which could lead to one precinct having more power than the other. So I asked for 5 in anticipation of having a potential for an additional precinct created, more than likely sometime in 2020 with the presidential election. 2020 sounds like a long time away, but when you think we're in the 2018 budget, it's really not. So I wanted to try to take care of this ahead of time. There has been, and rightly so, there has been a move by the Finance Committee to make management challenges. They approved the purchase of 4 rather than 5, hoping that I could purchase the additional one when we actually do have that new precinct. Most towns function with a spare anyway, but my argument is that all 4 or all 5, whatever you have, need to be the same equipment. And if we buy 4 now and wait a couple of years, there may be an advancement in equipment and one might have something that the other doesn't have. So I'd prefer to have 5 machines that are all equal in functionality. That being said, I had asked for $30,000, and that was based on what I had done in my research throughout the Commonwealth with other town clerks to find out what the best purchase and the best purchase price was, and I kind of worked a bit of negotiation outside of actually having something confirmed with a vendor, and I got to the $6,000 price range. So it would, for 5, it would be $30,000. Like I said, the Finance Committee approved 4, Capital Plan approved 4, but unfortunately with the management challenge, they made it $20,000, hoping that I could go out and find them cheaper. I am a professional manager with years of budgetary experience, and I ask for what I need. No more, no less. I need $30,000 to fund 5, and I'd appreciate your support in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. I have Mr. Keating.
I think the need may arise that we'll have to get an additional unit. There's no question. But I think, when we look at the fact that we're facing a 5.5% increase to the town budget, and there's very little that we have control over, this year in particular, with rising healthcare costs and other factors that are influencing the outcome of this 5.5% increase. And I would encourage you all to look at, what we have before us here, what items are necessary. Certainly anything with respect to public safety, installation of guardrails, putting in garage doors for the fire department, those things make sense, but I think we need to recognize that, we're facing financial constraints here. As citizens, the tax increases are recognizable to us and for some excessive. And we just have to be careful with adding on these types of expenses. They will add up, and that's how we have a 5.5% increase that we have no control over. You have control right now. I'm saying perhaps we push this forward to a later date, and in the spirit of austerity, we be a little bit more responsible and say no to this addition.
Thank you, Mr. Keating. Ma'am, did you want to address the motion to amend regarding these voting?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Heather Romano, 8 Dillingham Way. To piggyback on what Mr. Keating said, I agree that to add more to our list right now when we don't need it, and on top of what Mr. Gallagher said is that we actually may get a few more years out of these, I would almost move to say let's strike the whole line item. I know I'm not making an amendment, but I would vote no on this amendment and go further to say we shouldn't even buy it at all because you can get all 5 of them in a year or two when he's going to need the 5th and when the ones that are in service are going to be ready to be replaced, because I believe he said that we have another year or two at least, maybe 2 or 3 years out of them. So I'm just kind of concerned that now we're increasing it and buying them so much earlier than we need them. Hold off and buy all 5 at once in a year. Even a year holding off is just a year we get more money and out of our pockets, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Romano. Mr. Rizzio, then Mr. Gallagher, Mr. Wilson, and then Sir over there.
Actually, with the election cycles, now is when we need to replace them. We agree fully with that. The Capital Planning Committee, when we reviewed it, we've got a midterm coming up in 2018. We've got, another presidential in 2020. To implement a new system first year in one of these contentious elections is probably not the smartest thing. Doing it as soon as we can is a smarter way. Plus, the systems we have actually are well past their service life. They had a hard time actually completing this election cycle. Likely the future election cycles are going to be just as contentious, and trying to use antiquated equipment that is potentially vulnerable due to the operating systems in use with them, it is ideal that we replace them now. So the Capital Planning Committee strongly agrees with funding this now, though we did recommend 4 vice 5.
Thank you, Mr. Rizzio. Mr. Gallagher?
Obviously, it's not easy to come up here and ask for money. I've had to do it the last 4 years just for a salary. This year, I chose not to do that. It's very difficult to come up here and ask for money. But when you need something, you need something. As I said, I asked 2 years ago to put this on the back burner. Let's try to get this on now. I could have asked for it 2 years ago to get it now so that we would be prepared for those elections coming up in 2018 and 2020. 2020 sounds like a long time away, but if we have the 89% turnout that we had this particular election, we won't have a count for anyone. I would not ask for what I don't need. I was just under the assumption that we had $800,000 in free cash. I'm asking for $10,000 of that $800,000. Keep in mind, I am paying just as much in taxes as you are. I am a resident, and I am struggling just like everyone else. I wouldn't ask for it if I didn't need it. Again, like I said, I ask for no more and no less than what I need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. Mr. Wilson?
So one advantage of sitting up here is I got to whisper to Paul, actually, the question that the lady had just asked. I said, would you rather get 5 next year instead of 4 this year? And as you just heard explained by a couple of people, there's reasons to do this. Another reason for it is cost increases, that the cost next year invariably is going to be higher than the cost this year. And so I'm speaking for myself, not for the board. I think that if we hire people and we make them a department head and we empower them, you give them authority, you have to support the decisions that they make. If our town clerk, who's responsible to run our elections, says that we're going to have a new voting station, or that we need a backup, and we're not talking about, a great deal of additional funds, I'm going to support him in that. Would I rather have it be $20,000 than $30,000 from a tax perspective? Yes. Would I rather ensure that our elections work correctly as we go forward, and that we don't have a compatibility issue trying to buy one that isn't compatible with the other 4 and fit a square peg in a round hole potentially? We can avoid that issue by just simply giving the tools that we're being told are needed. So I'm going to support the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Sir? And then I have you, Mr. Martin, after this gentleman.
It's Don Alcombright, 218 Indian Pond Road. I guess I just had a question on the, is there a cost benefit to still, since it's in still service, are we concerned that it'll cost more to service if there's an issue, as opposed to just dropping the 20 grand on new ones or 30 grand on new ones?
Thank you, sir. Mr. Gallagher, if you would address the repairs.
The point is that they're gonna no longer be serviceable within the next year or two. All of the people that have the machine that we have either replaced them or are in the process of replacing them. Anything that's of any value is being shipped outside into the Midwest because they might be able to use them there. So parts and service won't actually be available within the next few years here in Massachusetts. The cost I don't know, cost benefit. The point is that you need to process the ballots. And we have had and struggled over the last 2 years with these machines. I wouldn't be asking for them if I didn't think that we could get more years out of it. Like I said, I had initially requested this 2 years ago, hoping that I could get them maybe this year or next year. But now, after having the 89% turnout for that presidential election, my concern is that I need to get them now, because not only do we have to worry about having them for the ballot counting, but we need training. And the best time to get that training would be in the biannual state elections in 2018, which is only a year away. So if I wanted to use those machines, I'd have to fund them now in this budget.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. Does that answer you fully?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Martin?
Just a couple of Bill Martin, Winter Street. Mr. Gallagher's asking something reasonable.
What?
He's very reasonable in his request. I did work on the polls for a number of years, not since Mr. Gallagher did, but the previous clerk. And we always fought with these machines. There was always jamming, always a problem with them. And I just said, we need to think about replacing them. But it wasn't my issue. It belonged to the town clerk. Now he stepped up and said, yes, let's replace them. We need to do that before we have a problem. We spent hours already talking about secret ballots and all kinds of things like that. This is a secret ballot. If we don't use these, what are we going to do?
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Sir? Come on, sir. You? Come. Sorry. Mr. Beard?
Yes?
Yeah, it's you. You're the only one up there.
Hi, Peter Baird, 109 Summer Street. I support this motion, but I do have a question. Is should one of these fail, what are the costs? What's the impact? What's the workaround if we don't have a spare, so that we know the magnitude of the issue?
Mr. Gallagher?
If we don't have if we don't have a spare, at this particular point in time, we have 4. If one of those jams and is no longer operable, the ballots for that particular precinct would need to be hand counted. You can't use precinct 1's ballot tabulator for precinct 2's ballots. So they would have to be hand counted. The cost at that point, there wouldn't be a cost, because you can't like have someone come in and fix it within an hour and then start putting ballots in. All of those ballots, any ballots that weren't processed by the time it broke down and the time it was actually completed, would still be required by state law to be hand counted, because we wouldn't be allowed to actually submit them into the machine.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. Seeing no further debate, this is now just on the motion to amend by Mr. Gallagher. On line item number 6, changing it from $20,000 to $30,000 to allow the purchase of 5 tabulators, with the total now amending to $404,765, with the the additional $10,000 coming from free cash. So that's the motion to amend. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Motion to amend carries. And we had the deputy clerk up here to avoid any conflict of interest. I do need it, thank you. To avoid any conflict of interest on tabulating that vote. So thank you, Assistant Clerk.
Because I have no personal gain.
Yes?
No.
We can't, we haven't voted the article, we're still in the open article. Yeah, but good idea. I'm there on the next moment. So, back to Article 30, as I'm doing this, Article 31 as amended now. So I have, ma'am, you up there?
Yes. Jessica Kramer, 10 Grays Beach Road. My question's not about the nature of the expenditures, but more the source of the funds. You want to appropriate approximately $281,000 from the Capital Project Stabilization Fund. I'm wondering what the remaining balance of that fund will be, and if that is adequate to fund future projected capital expenditures.
Mr. Rizzio, do you know what's in the Capital Project Stabilization Fund, or do you need Ms. McKinnon for that?
Actually, with the probably have safer that way.
The balance in the capital project stabilization fund, assuming that this article goes forward as it is presented and with the amendment, the capital project stabilization fund will have $377,000 available in it to begin to fund next year's capital plan.
Is that adequate based on capital budgeting projected forward?
I'm going to let Andy answer that one.
So one of the things we've actually been endeavoring to do is develop a 5-year plan, and that's in the book, and we've been trying to level it as best we can, so that our expenditures are fairly flat, so that we don't have one year where it's $2 million and the next year where it's $400,000. We've tried to do that by trying to have the departments project when they're going to purchase equipment. The difficulty is that there are a lot of unforeseen large capital expenses coming down the pike that we've talked about with this potential for the school roof replacement, some of the other large projects that we just don't know yet. One, what the cost is going to be and exactly what year we're going to have to do that. Our goal here was to keep it as close to flat as we could. In other words, we were not, we were trying to avoid taking anything out of the fund and having the fund be what it was at the start of the year, the stabilization fund, so that what we spent was basically the meals plus what we could get from free cash. So we remained fairly level in the stabilization fund from where we started.
Thank you, Mr. Rizzio. Does that answer your question, Ms. Kramer?
I guess it does, yes.
Thank you. Don't need it. Mr. Fons?
Yes, John Michael Font, 16 May Avenue. Regarding item number 3, $13,800 for the 6 AEDs for the cruisers. I'm wondering, how many cruisers do we have out in town at a given time?
I would have to defer to the chief on that.
Yeah, Chief, do you have that in regard to how many cruisers you have on active duty each shift?
Usually there's a patrol supervisor and 3 patrolmen. Sometimes there's a detective or K-9 officer as well.
So like 4 to 5, approximately?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank
3,
you.
4, 5, 6 sometimes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fons. So seeing no further debate, now moving Article 31 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Motion carries.
You have to declare it a 2/3.
Wait a minute, I need to,
Declare it a 2/3.
This is saying a majority.
It's a 2/3.
All right, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to count it. This is saying it's a majority vote. Oh, because we broke it down, right, okay. Sorry, I need that as a 2/3. I need my counters. Let's do it real quick. Sorry. All those in favor of Article 31 as amended, say aye. Raise your cards. What's the matter? Oh, jeez. Yeah, here, he's got a card. Paul. And you got him? Mr. Basler? Oh, that's Mr. Pepe?
Yeah,
Mr. Pepe, you
Andy's
got
with them.
Finance Committee and Mr. Rizzio? Thank you. Mr. Basler?
42.
Mr. Basler, 42. Mr. Pepe? Mr. Pepe, 40. Mr. Armstrong? 29. All those opposed to Article 31 as amended? Card. No, there were no. Oh. 1 second, he's missed.
111, did you get?
Yes. Mr. Basler? 0. Mr. Pepe? 0. Mr. Armstrong? 10. Mr. Armstrong is 10. I would like to thank my tellers for tonight. Thank you so much.
Madam
The motion-
Moderator.
1 minute, I'm not done yet. Are you changing your vote?
No, I'd like to move
Okay.
to reconsider.
Okay, I'm not even tallying. So the motion carries with 111 for and 10 opposed as a 2/3 majority vote. Just have to announce that. 2/3 majority vote. All right, now with that, I just wanted to make sure I thanked my tellers because they were everybody's going to jump. So now I have a motion to reconsider, Mr. Basler?
Yes.
I have that from Mr. Basler, motion to reconsider. I have that second on that. All those, again, ladies and gentlemen, reconsider means you want to open it up and discuss it some more. Motion to reconsider, that would be a yes. A no is let's done, we're done talking. Sorry. All those in favor of the motion to be considered, say aye. All those opposed? No. Motion does not carry. I now have from Ms. McFarland. I understand you have a motion for me.
Because the next article may bring lengthy debate, I would ask that we make a motion to the second session of town meeting.
All right, so I have a motion to adjourn this session of town meeting to May 31. May 31, 2017 at 7 o'clock at Kingston Intermediate School. Same bat place, same bat time. And that is being done now, so that's a motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? And it's 7 o'clock. And the time now, ladies and gentlemen, is 10:28 p.m. I think I did a second on